Chapter 162, The Mysterious Man. Abramovich hovered above the instrument, circling until he found a weakness. The device could only be operated by people. There were more than a dozen technicians stationed beneath the machine, working the controls in a practiced rhythm. But the control console itself was protected by an energy shield. Abramovich's powers couldn't pierce it. Evie considered his options and, quietly, reached out to Giratina with telepathy. Giratina gritted through the pain and listened to the plan. Then he began to struggle more violently, forcing the operators at the console to react. One of them immediately increased the machine's energy output. Abramovich melted into the shadows and began tracing the surge, following the direction the extra energy was coming from. Meanwhile, Otani was locked in a fierce duel with a young man. Commands flew between them like shouts across a battlefield. Bulbasaur. Leafblade, Otani barked. Mala, get out of the way. Use Wave of Evil, the young man snapped back. Seed machine gun. Another attack followed. Mala dodged and launched a sneak attack aimed at a vital point. Vulpecula, hold steady. Giant Vine Whip, Otani ordered. Using a defensive maneuver, Otani's team blocked Mala's sneak strike. Then, with the hammer-shaped end of the massive Vine Whip, they slammed into Mala hard. Bulbasaur, Sweet Scent. Pink gas poured out and blanketed the battlefield. The young trainer's face tightened into a frown, and he let out a frustrated sigh. The floral aroma rolled over them. Mala, his lead Pokémon, shuddered and slowed, movement becoming sluggish. Mala, Icy Wind! Blow it away! They tried to clear the air, but Bulbasaur's sweet scent was too concentrated. Mala's Icy Wind could only sweep a fraction of the cloud aside before the perfume rushed back in. The Pokémon staggered, pain flashing across its features. The trainer felt the effects as well and began to back away, desperate to get out of the scent's range. Otani didn't give them the chance. Bulbasaur, Sunbeam. A colossal column of light tore toward the retreating pair. Seeing it, Mala lunged and shoved his trainer out of the beam's path, taking the full blast himself. The sunlight struck him squarely. His legs went rubbery, and his strength drained almost to nothing. Mala! Damn it! Bring Mala back! You idiots! You haven't finished this! The young trainer barked into his intercom as he scrambled away. Voices crackled in reply. All right, sir. We saw Giratina struggling back there. We're sending support now. Fire! Fire! From somewhere on the structure, a massive cannon swung to bear on Otani and Bulbasaur. Its barrel hummed and began to gather energy, a menacing light building at its muzzle. Otani's hair stood on end. A cold, spreading dread ran through him. It was already too late to dodge. A massive beam of energy slammed down from the sky. Vulpecula, defend with everything you've got, someone shouted. Bulbasaur, Vulpecula, dropped beneath Otani, wrapping its vines around him and bracing itself to take the blast. The beam tore into the ground, punching a huge smoking hole where it hit, then slowly faded away. Success! Came excited voices through the intercom. Soldiers cheered. One young man, listening over the comms, let out a relieved breath. He hadn't expected Otani to be so hard to kill. Bulbasaur seemed indestructible. At that moment, Otani and Venusaur were clinging to the mouth of the cave. As Otani almost slipped, Venusaur lashed its vines out to hold entrance. Because of that, it took the brunt of the residual energy and was struck hard, its wounds severe. In this inverted world, there was no sunlight, and Venusaur's injuries would heal only slowly. Otani fumbled in his pocket. Luckily, he always kept the cube with him. He pushed it into Venusaur's mouth without hesitation. After swallowing the cube, Venusaur felt an immediate rush of relief. The question was what to do next. If it went up the slope, it would still be in the line of fire of that terrible energy cannon, and Bulbasaur wouldn't be quick enough to dodge it. At that moment, Abramovich crept up to Otani and murmured into his ear, "Nice work, Eevee. Bulbasaur, get up there." Bulbasaur didn't hesitate. Using Vine Whip, it vaulted out of the cave. Abramovich let out a relieved breath and was starting to pull his team back when Otani suddenly burst out onto the cave's threshold. "Humph, the ghost is still here," Otani sneered. "Prepare to fire again." "Roger that." The energy cannon began to charge, but the glow at its muzzle wavered, and then the shot misfired. The energy ropes that had bound Giratina flickered. The creature gave a small, struggling motion. The restraints snapped, disintegrating into shards of energy that drifted away. Giratina rose slowly to its feet, unnervingly calm. Yet even from that distance, Otani could sense the raw, overwhelming rage coiled beneath its stillness. It looks like we don't have to do anything. I watched strange energy flare up around Giratina, and in an instant a terrifying aura expanded outward as it shifted into its origin form. Its 6 legs shrank into thorn-like spines, the body lengthened, 4 golden spikes sprouted from the tip of its tail, and the wings reshaped into 6 ghostly ribbons. A black miasma bled off the creature, filling the air with a cold, inexplicable dread. One of the technicians at the control console went rigid, then stammered. Giratina opened its maw and unleashed a single searing beam of destructive energy. The ray struck the device that had bound it for so long and obliterated it in a heartbeat. It was the deepest humiliation of its existence, and Giratina would wash it away in blood. With the restraint gone, it lashed out and descended toward the young man. The young man showed no panic. He met Otani's eyes and spoke with an unsettling calm. "I didn't expect you to ruin our plan. We'll meet again soon." He gave Otani a strange smile, drew a crystal from his pocket, crushed it in his hand, and vanished on the spot. Giratina's destructive death ray missed, and he could only howl at the sky in frustration. There was no time to sulk, though. He shot toward the reverse world pillar and poured reverse energy into it, patching the damage as fast as he could. It took a long, tense stretch of effort before the collapse of the reverse world finally stopped. When it was over, Giratina slipped out of his origin form. Otani hurried up with the remaining energy cubes and fed them to him. After a few chewed bites and one long swallow, Giratina visibly steadied. He reopened the channel to the reverse world and told Otani to go through first. Otani ran back to the farm for supplies, then returned into the reverse world to deliver them. Only then did he breathe a little easier. Back on the farm, Otani sat silently in the living room, gently stroking Libatia with his left hand. He replayed the earlier conversation with the young man in his mind, focusing on that expression. The look had been so strange, too probing, oddly cold. He could still see it clearly. Why had the young man stared at him like that? The gaze left Otani with a tight, awkward feeling, as if he were an animal being observed in a cage. Things felt like they were getting more complicated by the minute. And Otani was sure of one other thing. There had to be a large organization backing those people. No ordinary person could get hold of Giratina's machine. The device alone was worth a fortune, far beyond the reach of everyday collectors. While Otani racked his brains trying to analyze it, something else was happening elsewhere. A young man knelt on one knee in a strange, shadowed chamber and reported to a figure clad in black. He carefully omitted Otani's name. He only said he had been blocked by a troublesome trainer. The man in the black robe didn't look up. He sat back on a black throne, eyes fixed on a dark book cradled in his hands. He gave a single nod and waved the youth away without speaking. As the young man bowed and withdrew, he cast a greedy glance at the beer. "Oak, did Jack lie to you just now?" he asked under his breath. Once the man had left, the robed figure addressed the empty air. "No need," he said softly. "He's still useful to the clown." The air in front of him flickered once, then stilled. The chamber sank back into an eerie silence. Soon, the man in black murmured to himself. Chapter 163. The Olympus Venue is built. The mysterious man's attempt to capture Giratina failed. The Olympus Venue was finished, and the mysterious man's attempt to capture Giratina had failed. Events that ought to have been a relief. Yet Otani couldn't bring himself to feel happy. It was already his 3rd year, and he had every reason to be confident he could weather whatever came next. The gap in power between him and his opponents was already vast. On top of that, he was now a special consultant to Team Rocket. As long as they still needed the cubes he built, they wouldn't move against him without cause. With Team Rocket no longer an immediate threat, the only remaining suspect was the man believed to be Zhenxing. Still, Otani couldn't shake the feeling that the same hand was pulling strings behind all of it. There were too few clues to follow, and worrying wouldn't help. What he could be fairly certain of was that the mastermind behind everything was the person who destroyed the parallel world. As for why they wanted that world gone, Otani wasn't so vain as to think it had anything to do with him. There had to be some other motive, but exactly what it was remained unclear. Otani set those matters aside for the time being, deciding he could follow up and look for clues later. For now, he told his friends what had happened and asked them to keep an eye out for the strange evil organizations that had been cropping up across different regions. He even described the team's uniform styles so they would recognize them. Giratina was furious, the sort of anger that nothing could fix except a week of hot pot. It would do her good if the two mischievous brothers could do something to help her blow off steam. She had lived with Latina for so many years, and this was the first time she had been treated so unfairly. If she got the chance, she swore she would make them pay. Melancholy made her reluctant to return to the reversed world. Instead, she stayed at Otani's farm, listless and bored, wandering about and eating hot pot every day. As the new year approached, another important matter came up. Funding for a new group of underprivileged rookie trainers was about to be distributed again. Using the list Ahai had provided, Otani contacted President Damaranch and asked him to speak with those children and help arrange the support. Otani spent a few minutes on the phone arranging the formalities. The selected children should come to Professor Oak to receive their starter Pokémon, along with various subsidies and other resources. Damaranch had a surprise for him as well. With the aristocratic family's opposition easing, Oak's side could now distribute Pokédexes much more smoothly, and they were able to supply them to the 100 chosen kids. The Alliance couldn't fully underwrite the program from its central budget, but Presidents Otani and Damaranch had agreed to cover the remaining costs. After confirming the last details, Otani hung up. Finding Pokémon of the right age on the farm meant that new trainers would soon be searching for partners. The next few days would be important. Both the staff and the Pokémon needed to prepare, and hopeful trainers would have to make themselves available for selection. All the interested Pokémon seemed eager to be tried out. It was one of the rare days when he had nothing pressing to do, so Otani took the old fishing rod off the peg and walked out to the backyard lake. He hadn't used it in a long time. As soon as he sat on the bank, the Mienshao came over and greeted him with their usual friendly, energetic bows. A few young Mienshao tumbled about at their feet, full of restless energy. In the water, several lively clownfish darted around a graceful melodic that bobbed near the surface. Otani smiled. The youngsters, those bright, bouncy little Mienshao, were clearly the next generation, the offspring of the adults watching over them. He cast his line and settled in, enjoying the easy company and the quiet promise of the days to come. There were already 10 melodic on the farm, and the Noen fish they'd brought back had basically finished evolving. The numbers were perfect, 5 breeding pairs, exactly the selection Otani had planned. The scrappy little fish darting around them were the offspring. Unlike wild clownfish, the ones born on Otani's farm had been raised alongside their parents, so they were lively and bold instead of shy and dull. The melodic lingered with Otani for a while, then swam off to play on the far side of the pond. Dagu sat by the water with a fishing rod. There wasn't even any bait on the line. Suddenly, the rod twitched and then was yanked down hard. Otani's eyes widened. Could you really catch something without bait? He snatched the rod and began to pull with all his strength. A dark shadow moved under the surface, and Otani couldn't help but give a helpless laugh. Gyarados, you bastard, come up here. Underwater, Gyarados heard the shout. He broke the surface with a grin and spat the hook free. Roar! He seemed amused as he looked at them. Oh, you want to take me somewhere nice? What a mysterious place, Otani murmured, surveying the quiet woods. Gyarados gave a low, rumbling chuckle. All right, Otani said. I don't have anything to do today, so might as well go for a walk. He vaulted onto Gyarados' head. A little figure hopped up after him in a single bound, a tiny tadpole Pokémon, all-round belly and curled tail. Otani grinned and gave the little fellow a gentle tap on the head before they left the farm. Gyarados slipped into the stream and carried them through a tunnel of trees. After a long, lazy swim, they came out into a clearing, a deep, glassy lake hidden in the heart of the forest. By the water's edge, a blue, regal Pokémon lay curled in rest. Ah! Suicune, Otani breathed. At the sound of his voice, Suicune looked up, then rose and bounded away in a few sure leaps. Otani's chest sank a little. If only he'd kept quiet a moment longer, he could have watched Suicune closely. Better yet, he'd have loved to touch the graceful creature. Gyarados slid in toward the shore, and Otani dropped to the ground. "Gyarados," he asked as he shook off water, "did you happen to find Suicune by accident and call me over just to see him?" Gyarados gave another low, amused rumble, shook his massive head, and flicked his tail to point farther into the forest. Gyarados pointed, and Otani followed the gesture. Near the edge of the lake sat a scrawny, oddly colored Psyduck, staring blankly at its reflection, as if lost in thought. "I see," Otani said to himself. He set down the little mosquito-repellent coil he had been holding and moved towards Psyduck with caution. The Psyduck seemed deep in concentration and didn't notice him approach. Otani eased down beside it and kept quiet. "Want something to eat?" he asked softly. He pulled a handful of small food cubes from his pocket and offered them. Psyduck tilted its head but kept looking into the water. Otani patiently continued to offer cubes, one after another. It took several tries before Psyduck finally registered the food. It snatched a cube and shoved it into its mouth so fast it started to choke. Otani scooped up some lake water and poured it down the Psyduck's throat to help. The duck covered its head with its hands and turned to stare at Otani with the same vacant, blank expression. Both of them sat like that, Psyduck blinking slowly, Otani watching, for more than 10 seconds. Finally, Otani sighed, gave up, and shifted his attention elsewhere. Psyduck kept staring at Otani. After a few awkward coughs, Otani tried again. "Psyduck, do you want to come back with me? I have lots of good food at home." Psyduck said nothing, his vacant stare unwavering. Otani took that as consent and bent down to lift him. The little Pokémon was heavier than Otani expected, a sure sign he'd been well fed lately. He tucked Psyduck under his arm, climbed onto his Gyarados, and rode back to the farm. Once they reached the shore, Otani set Psyduck gently on the water's edge. "You can live here from now on," he told him. "Stay as long as you like." Psyduck watched Otani a moment longer, then turned to look at his own reflection in the lake and fixed his attention there. Otani smiled helplessly. Psyduck was slow and a little odd, but that was normal. He knew enough to understand Otani, or else he would have run off long before. After making sure Psyduck was settled, Otani went back to the house and was just about to put a kettle on when his phone rang. It was Carter. "Otani, the venue's up. Just finishing touches now. When can you come and take a look?" "Really, that's fantastic," Otani said, a grin spreading across his face. That was the best news he'd had in a long time. Otani set the teacup down with more force than necessary and pivoted toward Kentaro before the porcelain had even finished ringing. "Move," he snapped. Kentaro blinked mid-sip, the warm tea steaming between his fingers. "What, Otani? What are you doing?" He tried to sound calm, but the question came out thin. Otani's eyes were already on the door, sharply intent. "There's no time for questions." Otani reached across the low table and hauled Kentaro to his feet as if pulling a coat from a hanger. Kentaro yelped, the teacup clinking against the saucer as it was abandoned. "You're coming with me, on my back." "For what? I'm not a horse," Kentaro protested, one hand instinctively protecting his chest, the other trying to reclaim the cup. "You're the fastest way out of here." Otani's voice left no room for argument. He was already half out the door, shoulders squared, every movement charged with urgency. "Olympus starts in 20 minutes. The name hit Kentaro like a cold splash. Olympus, the venue that meant everything, that crowded stage where their futures were decided by a handful of heartbeats and a louder-than-life spotlight. They had rehearsed, argued, patched costumes and egos, and still somehow they were behind schedule. Kentaro's protest dissolved into a huff of resigned laughter. "You're unbelievable," he said, scolding and amused at once. He swung his legs up and around Otani's waist before he'd fully decided to refuse. Otani shifted under the sudden weight, then braced himself and took off down the hallway. The building blurred past, posters plastered with last season's stars, the smell of dust and stage makeup, while Kentaro clutched at Otani's shirt. Each step was a staccato beat, Otani's breathing even, steady, like a metronome. Kentaro felt remarkably ridiculous and oddly safe. "Tell me exactly why you thought carrying me like this was the rational option," Kentaro panted as they descended the stairwell, two at a time. Because if we ran separately, we'd get separated, Otani said. Because the taxi stand is a nightmare, and the subway. He cut off as they reached the street. The city had transformed in the late afternoon light. Taxis honked, pedestrians surged, and the Olympus marquee flashed in the distance, a band of gold and neon promising everything and nothing. Because you're heavy when you complain. Thanks, Kentaro muttered, but he didn't fight. He threaded his arms around Otani's neck and leaned close, watching the crowd part around them. People glanced at them, students in rehearsal sweatshirts, tourists with cameras. But no one could have guessed why these two were moving like they were fleeing a small apocalypse. They slipped past intersections and ducked through alleyways Otani knew like the back of his hand. Kentaro's heartbeat slowed to match the rhythm of Otani's steps, the panic in his chest ebbing away. They cut across a plaza, and then the street opened up. Olympus loomed ahead, the entrance already a little gold-washed with rushing performers and last-minute technicians. Otani set Kentaro down, just outside the loading doors, breath fogging in the cool air. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They were a little disheveled, hair askew, a smear of tea along Kentaro's sleeve where the cup had grazed him. But they were together. And they were here. The roar of the venue seeped out like an ocean against the shore, and their faces lit with the same fierce, ridiculous smile. Kentaro straightened his jacket and blew on a stray hair. "You could have asked me to run," he said, not hiding how pleased he was that Otani hadn't. Otani allowed himself a small grin. "And miss the look on your face when we get in on time? Never." They pushed through the loading doors into the controlled chaos of Olympus. Lights, cables, people shouting cues, and, shoulder to shoulder, hurried to the stage that would not wait for anyone. Otani urged Kentaro into a full gallop and raced toward his destination. Even before he reached it, the Olympus Trial Stadium came into view, the enormous complex Carter had recently built with his vast fortune. Otani slowed Kentaro as he took it in. The first thing that struck him was the sheer scale. The building exceeded every expectation and even surpassed what he'd imagined when he drew up the plans. Although he had designed it himself, seeing it completed still left him breathless. They pulled up to the main entrance, and Otani dismounted. Carter was already standing there, hands clasped in front of his chest, a wide, proud smile on his face as he gazed at the stadium they had brought into existence. "Well?" Carter asked, turning to him. "Spectacular, right?" Otani's eyes shone. "Yes, it's incredible." Carter chuckled and gave Otani a friendly pat on the shoulder. "And that's just the outside. Wait until you see what's in here. Honestly, I still don't know where you got the ideas for such a brilliant design. I've been in this business for more than 20 years, but this is by far the most satisfying thing I've ever done. You could call it a work of art." The two of them walked slowly into the stadium. The first impression was its scale. Huge, unexpectedly so. The space swallowed sound, and anyone standing inside would feel instantly small. Otani swept his gaze over the packed stands that ringed the arena. Carter took a remote from his pocket, thumbed a button, and the grass in the center of the field began to part. Slowly, 4 distinct arenas rose from the earth: wind, fire, mountain, and forest. Otani watched with a pleased, almost proud smile. It matched the drawings he'd submitted down to the smallest detail. The wind field in particular was a place of shifting challenges and opportunity. Its layout formed a gauntlet of traps, puzzles, and hazards that dared trainers and their Pokémon to improvise and adapt. It felt like the exhilarating tests of wit and courage from earlier tournaments, but with a different emphasis. This field rewarded silent understanding and close cooperation between trainer and partner more than showy individual moves. The rules on Windfield are simple. Finish the course first, and your team wins. But simplicity doesn't make victory easy. Each stage is cleverly designed to challenge not only a Pokémon's raw power, but a trainer's judgment and strategy. Success depends on trainer and Pokémon being in sync, trusting one another, reading the terrain and the opponent's moves, and making split-second tactical decisions. Teams that can think on their feet and coordinate smoothly have the best chance of crossing the line first. Windfield is also a place of deep bonds. Time and again, it has witnessed trainers and Pokémon supporting one another through setbacks and celebrating triumphs together. That loyalty and cooperation let them push past limits and sometimes perform miracles. As a different kind of competition, Firefield keeps the core rules of a traditional Pokémon battle, but layers on a team segment. It blends individual fighting skill with coordinated team tactics, demanding both personal strength and collective strategy. This competition is a true test of both a trainer's individual strength and their ability to work as a team. In this arena of passion and strategy, every trainer will send out the Pokémon they've painstakingly raised. To prevail in these fierce battles, they must know each Pokémon inside and out, its strengths, its moves, and the tactics that best suit it. But raw power alone won't win the day. Because this is a team event, seamless cooperation is just as important. Trainers need to trust one another, learn each other's strengths and weaknesses, and craft tactics that make the most of their teammates' abilities. Only by combining exceptional individual skill with strong teamwork can a trainer shine on the fire field and capture the crowd's attention. This competition is more than a contest. It's a stage for courage, intelligence, and camaraderie. The Mount Ain Venue isn't just any arena. It's the Pokémon equivalent of a triathlon. Because the original venue couldn't accommodate an outdoor course, Otani came up with an elegant solution, a high-tech, fully indoor training complex. The new arena felt futuristic. Players moved through advanced facilities and tiered challenge zones instead of real mountain paths and rivers. Surrounding them was a convincing, immersive environment generated by virtual reality systems, so realistic that it tricked the senses while keeping everything safely inside. The event became more than a physical contest. It was a trial of will as much as of strength. Competitors had to remain focused and stubbornly determined through a gauntlet of simulated dangers, scaling sheer cliffs, wading or swimming through turbulent virtual currents, and even engaging in intense battles against powerful Pokémon opponents. Every stage was packed with variables and unpredictable twists, so only trainers who combined exceptional fitness with quick thinking and courage could hope to stand out. Otani designed the course to push players to their limits and draw out hidden reserves of potential. Originally, he had intended the forest site to be a straightforward wilderness survival training area, but after weighing the logistical constraints and the possibilities of modern tech, he decided to change the plan and build this immersive VR-driven arena instead. Because a free-for-all would put trainers' personal safety at serious risk, the event was redesigned as a points match. On the playing field, cards worth various point values periodically appear at random, and competitors must race to collect as many as they can. The trainer with the highest score wins. To keep things tense, each player's top score is displayed openly on the field, so whoever leads becomes an immediate target. If hit by a particular weapon, a player's points are reduced accordingly. The format cleverly blends elements from the previous 3 stages, and it demands a well-rounded skill set, keen strategic vision, patience, and the raw strength to back up both. Only those who combine all 3 can hope to excel in this fierce contest. No matter the type, size, or organizer, every competition ultimately shares the same purpose and value. Their aim was to push the telepathic bond and teamwork between trainer and Pokémon to the highest level. Raw power mattered, of course, but the energy born of deep friendship could not be ignored. In a ruthless competition, it was unrealistic for one side to carry everything alone. Only when strength and trust were perfectly combined could they unleash an unstoppable force. After wandering the grounds for hours, Otani finally felt satisfied and prepared to leave. Only a few finishing touches remained, about a day's work, and a warm, elaborate ribbon-cutting ceremony would be organized later, with celebrities invited from every region. Those details were the league's responsibility. All Otani had to do was make a brilliant appearance on opening day. Reluctantly, he mounted Kintaro and rode slowly out of the magnificent Olympus venue. I only received 1 sentence, not the full chapter. If you paste the chapter text, I can rewrite the entire thing. In the meantime, here are a couple of polished options for that sentence, literal and slightly expanded, you can use or build on. Literal rewrite. When he returned to the farm, his heart swelled with longing and anticipation. Slightly expanded, more evocative. Back at the farm, he felt a tightening in his chest, an ache of longing tempered by a bright, expectant hope. Tell me which tone you prefer, simple, faithful, lyrical, gritty, etc. And paste the rest of the chapter when you're ready. I'll produce a full, coherent, idiomatic English version. Chapter 165. Hatching. Manaphy. The magnificent Olympus Stadium was finally finished. For the next few days, Otani was in high spirits. With the venue complete, the Olympus trial had its first real step forward, and his months-long financial burden had at last begun to ease. He still had to cover some promotional costs out of pocket, but those expenses were trivial compared to the price of building the stadium. There was one more reason for his good mood. The Manaphy egg he had acquired months earlier was about to hatch. For more than half a year, the egg had been slowly absorbing the special nutrient solution Otani had prepared for it, a water-based formula packed with the energy and minerals those sea-born Pokémon needed. When the last trace of the solution disappeared from the incubator, the egg began to glow, the light growing stronger and stronger until the shell finally cracked. A small blue Pokémon unfolded itself inside the cracked shell. Manaphy blinked, still a little dazed, and the first thing she saw was Otani's smiling face. Mana! Otani felt his heart go soft at the sight. It was almost too cute. He cradled Manaphy carefully in his arms. Manaphy started to wail, a sudden high little cry. Ah! Otani immediately began to soothe him, rocking gently and patting his back. There, don't cry. Be a good Manaphy, okay? The housekeeper had already brought a bottle of moo-moo milk. Otani popped a pacifier into Manaphy's mouth. As soon as the sweet milky scent reached him, he settled down. He gripped the bottle with both tiny hands and drank eagerly. The housekeeper watched the small blue life in his arms with obvious fondness, and when Otani saw her smile, he nodded and motioned for her to take him. Go on, you can hold him. She accepted him happily, but the moment Manaphy left Otani's arms, he began to cry again. With a soft laugh, Otani took him back, and the crying stopped at once. After finishing his milk, Manaphy's belly swelled into a little round bump. He let out an adorable burp, then curled his chubby hands around the fabric of Otani's shirt, clutching him tightly. She fought to keep her eyelids open, but sleep kept dragging them down. At last she gave in and dozed off in Otani's warm arms. He had meant to set Manaphy down and let her sleep peacefully, but when he tried to free himself from the tiny hands clamped to his shirt, he found she was holding on tight. Worried that any sudden movement would wake the baby, he stayed still, keeping her cradled against him. That made it hard to move, so he wandered the farm in slow, careful steps. A group of young Pokémon, those the Alliance had sent earlier, trailed behind him, buzzing with curiosity and excitement to see the newborn. Otani couldn't turn them away. They were too eager to look. When the little ones edged closer, a noise woke Manaphy, and she began to cry. Otani immediately went into soothing mode, rocking gently and humming soft sounds until she calmed and fell asleep in his arms again. When Manaphy finally drifted off again, the last weight lifted from Otani's chest. He stroked the little Pokémon gently, his eyes soft with relief and tenderness. Manaphy clung to him because it had imprinted. Seeing Otani first had made him its mother. That kind of attachment is common. Newborn Pokémon, like human babies, instinctively seek out the first creature that offers them security and comfort. As they grow, those youngsters learn the rules of the world and may one day realize that Otani isn't their biological parent. The bond, however, often remains. For that reason, many trainers prefer to raise Pokémon from infancy. Starting young not only creates a closer relationship, but also lets a trainer learn a Pokémon's personality, likes, and dislikes. Over time, through steady interaction and training, that mutual understanding deepens, and on the battlefield it can make all the difference. Of course, raising a Pokémon from its earliest days is far from easy. Caring for and training Pokémon takes patience, love, and a lot of energy, but the sense of accomplishment when a Pokémon you've raised grows stronger and starts to excel is impossible to put into words. Before he knew it, Otani had made his way to the small lake in the backyard and sat down, Manaphy cradled in his arms. Psyduck perched beside him, eyes wide with curiosity at the strange little creature. It cocked its head and watched Manaphy sleep, while Vulpix and the other Pokémon hovered nearby, keeping their distance and moving in hushed, careful steps so as not to disturb the baby's peaceful rest. Psyduck stared at Manaphy for a long moment, then turned its gaze to the glass-smooth surface of the water and squinted at its own reflection. Suddenly it brightened as though a light bulb had gone off in its head. It had realized something important. Otani, lost in thought, didn't notice Psyduck's little revelation. He was puzzled. By all rights, the egg Manaphy had laid should have hatched Fiona. Maybe the energy it had absorbed was enough to make up for its lack of qualifications, Otani thought. He lowered his head and watched Manaphy sleeping peacefully in his arms. What did it matter? As long as she grew up healthy and happy. With that thought, he couldn't help but let a small, relieved smile slip across his face. They sat by the lake for a while. When Manaphy woke, the first thing she did was check that Otani was still there. Seeing his gentle smile, she brightened at once and chirped, "Mana! Mana!" A breeze ran through the grass, making the reeds whisper as if it, too, were glad for her. Psyduck stood up and padded over to Otani, curiosity written across his face. He reached out a tentative wing and touched Manaphy. Noticing the little blue Pokémon, Manaphy beamed and offered her tiny hand. Psyduck took it gently. His whole body seemed to melt at the sight. "I know her. She's my sister," Psyduck thought, stunned and overjoyed. Chapter 166. You have been recorded in Giratina's little notebook. Otani's eyes widened as he stared at Psyduck's flushed face, a mix of surprise and mild confusion on his features. Mostly, though, he felt pleased. Psyduck had changed. For as long as Psyduck had lived on the farm, it had been listless, spending its days by the lake staring at its own reflection. It ate, it slept, and it did nothing else. Otani had tried countless times to reach it, to build some kind of bridge of communication, but every attempt had felt like a stone dropped into the water. No ripples, no answer. Seeing Psyduck respond and bloom under Manaphy's influence made Otani quietly happy. The sun was sliding toward the western horizon, painting the sky in a gorgeous wash of color. The afterglow spilled across the calm lake, turning the surface into a sheet of molten gold. Tiny minnows leapt from the water in a joyful frenzy, nimble and light as they danced, each splash scattering glistening droplets that fell back into the lake and spread perfect, shimmering ripples across the evening water. Otani carried Manaphy home and started preparing dinner. He no longer had to hold her all the time, but Manaphy still wanted to stay close. Whenever he cooked, she would curl up on his head and be the first to pass him whatever seasoning he reached for. Psyduck hovered nearby as usual, more accurately, always around Manaphy. At first, Otani had wondered if Psyduck was in love with her, but watching them made him realize that wasn't it at all. Psyduck treated Manaphy like a little sister and only wanted to protect her. As night fell, Otani finished a sumptuous meal and sat down, ready to enjoy it, when a heavy knock shook the door. He opened it to find Giratina standing there, furious. Otani sighed, put down the chopsticks he was about to use, and went to get a hot pot ready for his uninvited guest. "Giratina," he said with a wry smile, "it's been days. Why are you still so angry?" Giratina lashed its tail and bellowed, "Humph, I've lived for so long and never suffered such a great loss. If I catch those bastards, I'll make them pay." Giratina's fury was plain to see. Otani nodded. Anyone in his place would feel the same. The intruders had been like phantoms, appearing out of nowhere and disappearing just as quickly. Ever since that brief encounter, they had vanished without a trace. Word spread fast. A new, sinister organization was operating, and alliances around the world launched covert investigations, but all their efforts came to nothing. Now that Giratina had put them under scrutiny, those shadowy figures would have a difficult time. Giratina was not only immensely powerful, but notoriously single-minded. Once it took a grudge, it rarely let go until it had its revenge. After enjoying a hearty hot pot meal, Giratina bade farewell to the farm and plunged into the vast reaches of the reverse world, sweeping through territory after territory in search of any clue the mysterious trespassers might have left behind. Otani finished his dinner hurriedly and went to wash up. After everything was packed, he hauled his exhausted body back to his room. The moment he reached the bed, Otani collapsed onto it like a deflated balloon. Manaphy hopped up lightly and settled beside him, obedient and warm. Otani stared at the ceiling, letting his thoughts drift. Before long, the image of the mysterious young man from the reversed world rose unbidden to the front of his mind. It wasn't just the meeting itself that bothered him, it was the look in the man's eyes. Otani couldn't shake how wrong that expression felt. The longer he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. There was something strangely familiar about that gaze, as if the other person knew him, as if they had seen him somewhere before. But Otani was certain he had never seen this man in his life. He even went back over memories from a past life, searching for any clue. After turning everything over, he arrived at the same conclusion. In this life, or any previous one, there was no way he could already Keck, now the stranger. And yet, the man's eyes had said something else. If he didn't know the man, then why had that look carried such recognition? What secret was hidden behind it? The more Otani thought about it, the more it felt like he was falling into a bottomless pit. That strange expression he'd seen earlier nagged at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was the key to whatever mystery was unfolding. Questions crowded his mind until sleep became impossible. He lay awake far into the night, while Manaphy, curled up beside him, had already drifted off and was softly snoring. Watching the little creature sleep, so innocent, so trusting, his anxieties eased as if by magic. He smoothed the quilt over her with a gentle hand, careful not to disturb her, and finally let his own eyelids close. But the rest wasn't peaceful. Otani was plunged into a nightmare, the world around him being torn apart by a nameless, irresistible force. He tried to fight it, but was helpless as cities crumbled and light was swallowed. Pokémon everywhere were caught in the chaos, unable to escape. One by one they were lost as the landscape dissolved into ruin. The horror of being powerless to stop it pressed on him until he jolted awake. He blinked against the ceiling and realized he hadn't been transported through time or into another reality at all. He had simply fallen asleep at the table from sheer exhaustion. Worse, when he checked his messages the next morning, he discovered his pay had been docked for dozing off on the job. The awful dream lingered in his mind, though, and that mysterious expression still felt as important as ever. At dawn, Otani woke with a start and sat up, pressing a hand to his forehead. His palms were slick with sweat, and his shirt clung damp against his skin. His whole body felt clammy and uneasy. The clock read 4 o'clock. He'd only slept about 4 hours, but he hadn't felt like he could fall back asleep. Careful not to wake the Pokémon sleeping nearby, he slipped out of bed on tiptoe and headed for the washroom. He turned the shower to cold and let the icy water run over his exhausted body. Whoever tries to take everything I care about now, he told himself, jaw set, I'll protect it with my life. The freezing water cascaded down like a waterfall, stinging his face and sharpening his resolve. It was early spring, and the pre-dawn water was bitterly cold. He didn't stay under it long. After a quick, bracing rinse, he toweled off, put on fresh clothes, then descended the stairs and stepped into the courtyard with steady, determined strides. Dawn was just breaking over the eastern horizon, the sun spilling its first golden light across the land and warming everything it touched. Bathed in that gentle glow, Farfetch'd stood on the yard, vigorously waving the long green onion he always carried. Otani, unable to sleep, picked up his wooden sword and walked over to him. Farfetch'd blinked and cocked his head. "Gah, my lord, why are you up so early?" Otani gave a small, tired shrug. "It's nothing. I couldn't sleep. Don't worry about me." With that, he began to swing the wooden sword, the soft thwack of wood cutting through the morning air as he moved through slow, deliberate practice strokes under the new sun. Chapter 167, The Returning Adventure Team. Dawn had only just broken when Otani stood on the wide lawn, a wooden sword in his hands. The new sun cast a soft, golden light over the grass, and the air was cool and clear. Beside him, Farfetch'd waddled and hopped in eager anticipation. Otani drew a steady breath, let the freshness fill his lungs, and tightened his grip on the hilt. He began to move. His swings were fluid and controlled, each cut driven with focused power. Farfetch'd matched him step for step, dancing around the arcs of the blade with bright, feathered enthusiasm. Sweat began to bead on Otani's forehead, but his expression never wavered. There was only concentration and the quiet joy of practice. They moved together as if they shared one mind, a seamless duo executing every rehearsed technique. When Otani finished the final form, he sheathed the wooden sword and allowed himself a satisfied smile. The sun climbed higher, bathing them in warm light. He let out a long, contented exhale, gathered his things, and prepared to head back. Without warning, Farfetch'd was wrapped in a shimmering, powerful force. A brilliant light burst from its body like a rising tide, flooding the lawn in a cascade of luminous energy. Otani froze, every instinct on alert, as the glow swelled and the air around them crackled with something ancient and unstoppable. The sight stunned Otani into silence. He stood frozen, unable to accept what his eyes were showing him. Everyone in Kanto knew Farfetch'd never had an evolved form. Ever since the League had banned them, few trainers had even considered taking one as a partner. And yet here was a Farfetch'd bathing in unmistakable evolution light, as if it were defying everything they knew. As the change took hold, the bird's body shifted in almost miraculous fashion. The two spring onions it gripped lengthened and sharpened, the tops forming razor edges, while the lower portions thickened into the hilts of blades. At the same time, its plumage turned a pure, bright white, save for a small gray sweep across its back that hung like a samurai's cloak. When the light dimmed, the transformed Farfetch'd stood revealed. Its once comical eyebrows had become thick and decisive, setting off a face of hard resolve that made everyone nearby catch their breath. It let out a single, clear cry, like a command, and even the surrounding Pokémon seemed to answer, greeting their master. The lively, fidgety manner that had defined this Farfetch'd was gone. In its place was a stern, almost rigid presence, unlike anything they had seen before. The onion duck, the evolved Farfetch'd, knelt, body bent forward, forehead almost touching the ground in a pose of absolute deference. It wasn't a casual bow, but an ancient formal salutation, the kind passed down by warriors long ago. Every detail of the gesture spoke of reverence and loyalty. The posture, the measured movement, the strict adherence to the old etiquette. The small figure prostrated on the earth looked at once solemn and slightly pitiable. In actions rather than words, it demonstrated what it meant to carry out one's duty with total conscientiousness. Facing its master, it set aside all pride and surrendered itself wholly to service. Otani watched as if transfixed, as though nothing else in the world existed. He stared, eyes wide and jaw slack, barely able to form a sound. Only a stunned, half-uttered, "This," escaped him before he fell silent again. Minutes slipped by before he finally came to his senses and realized that Farfetch'd had been kneeling without him noticing. "Ah," Otani blurted, looking apologetic. "Onion duck, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you kneel. Please, get up." He reached out to help. The Farfetch'd rose obediently, showing no sign of resentment, and quacked gratefully. Then it folded its wings across its chest, took on a solemn expression, and stood quietly at Otani's side. It said nothing, but its steady, loyal eyes made clear. Whatever happened, it would stand by its trainer. After a moment, Otani smiled. "Now that way, have completed your evolution, you should have a new name." How about Onion Warrior?" The Farfetch'd answered with two excited quacks, hurriedly bowed, and seemed to thank him for the name. Otani still felt a little uneasy around the Green Onion Warrior. He was too stiff and formal. So, putting on an exaggerated, archaic, lordly tone, Otani said deliberately, "Onion Warrior, I have never liked people or things that cling to formality. From now on, I forbid you to behave so rigidly." He tightened his face on purpose to sell the effect. The Green Onion Warrior froze for a moment, then, after thinking it over, asked cautiously, "Master, are you displeased?" "Yes," Otani replied decisively. "It's better to be easygoing." The Onion Warrior suddenly understood and bowed again. Then, as if remembering himself, he stopped mid-bow, straightened up, and stood there awkwardly, scratching his head and forcing a sheepish smile. Otani felt a wave of relief when he saw the Onion Warrior finally relax. If he'd kept up that pompous act much longer, he would have been mortified, and if anyone else had seen it, he'd have wanted to run off to the reverse world and live with Giratina. Otani had never meant to hide the Onion Warrior's evolution. There was no reason to. He called Professor Oak as soon as he could. "Oh, is that the evolved Farfetch'd? Otani, Onion Warrior is the perfect name for him." Oak exclaimed, his face practically pressed against the screen. An assistant off to the side coughed and shot Oak a look, clearly trying to rein in his excitement. "Professor, remember, professionalism," the assistant reminded gently. Oak waved the reminder away. Still, I'd like to have Onion Warrior brought to the Oak Research Institute. I'll need to run some tests and collect data. Otani thought about it and agreed. He wanted to understand what had changed in Onion Warrior's body, and his own equipment wasn't anywhere near a professional lab's. He asked the Onion Warrior whether it would come along. The Pokémon nodded without hesitation. Otani slipped Onion Warrior back into its Pokéball and sent it straight to the Oak Research Institute. All right, Otani, that's everything for now, Oak said, and cut the video call so fast Otani didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. Otani gave a wry smile, stepped out into the yard, stretched his arms, and went to work. Suddenly, Otani felt the sunlight above him disappear. Mama! He looked up and was relieved to see Frosty Milk Fairy and the others returning. Frosty Milk had jumped down from beneath the blue crow, and Otani's reflexes snapped into action. He used his superpowers to catch her mid-fall. His power was more than enough to handle her weight. Dagu, a little annoyed, tapped Frosty Milk Fairy lightly on the head. She melted into Dagu's arms, acting like a spoiled child. Mama, Mama, she cooed. Don't do something that dangerous again, Otani said sternly. Mama, Mama! Frosty Milk Fairy clung to him for a moment, then hurriedly promised she wouldn't do it again. Otani gave her a helpless glare. Meow, Meowth trilled from the sky, and B, chimed Celebi as they fluttered down. Meowth covered her mouth, trying not to laugh, and Celebi giggled along. Otani grinned and gathered them both into a warm hug. The blue crow landed nearby and calmly used its beak to preen its feathers. All right, it's decided. We're having a party today, Otani announced cheerfully. Chapter 168, Rainbow Feather. Otani threw a small welcome party on the farm for the returning adventuring team. He'd laid out an assortment of treats, sweet cream cakes, crisp cookies, creamy ice cream, and several platters of fresh fruit. Dagu had contributed a number of elaborate dishes as well. Juan and the others dug in happily, chatting and laughing as they ate. Not long after, a detailed report from Professor Oak's lab arrived by teleport, and extremely thorough facts filled with measurements and diagnostics on the Onion Warrior's body. The pages were dense with numbers. The most dazzling figure was the attack stat, which was astonishingly high. All the other indicators were fairly ordinary, showing little difference from those of Kong Yubing. From the data, it was clear the Onion Warrior represented a new evolved form of the Kanto region far-fetched. At the end of the facts, Professor Oak added a note saying he intended to publish a formal paper on this new evolutionary form under Otani's name. Dagu, however, barely glanced at the message and paid it little mind. To him, he was simply a peaceful, kind-hearted farmer. Academic accolades meant nothing in his life. When the Onion Warrior returned, Tycho took the chance to introduce him to everyone who had gathered. The friends were stunned. None of them had ever seen the evolved form of a Farfetch'd before. One by one, they offered their congratulations to Tycho and the Onion Warrior. The Onion Warrior blushed but kept up a humble, composed front. He thanked each of them in turn, shy yet polite. For many on the adventure team, it was their first time meeting him, and they studied him with curious, admiring eyes. Grateful for the welcome, he didn't hesitate to demonstrate the full extent of his skill. He moved with the speed of a swallow in flight. His blade work came like a sudden storm. Each strike carried raw power and unstoppable momentum, precise, lethal, and beautiful. I thought his performance would surely win thunderous applause and cheers from everyone present. Contrary to what others expected, no one reacted, except Otani, who was clapping enthusiastically from the sidelines. To the onlookers who didn't understand the subtleties of swordsmanship, it all just looked like a bit of fun. Only someone like Otani, who truly appreciated the mysteries of kendo, could grasp the deeper meaning of what had just happened. At that moment, Otani could feel it clearly. The Onion Warrior had just broken through in his training. His understanding of kendo had risen to a new level. Watching the Green Onion Warrior's loose, effortless swordplay, Otani felt an irresistible urge well up inside him. He drew his wooden sword in a flash, eager to test himself. The two of them took their stances. Their bokkens tapped together in a formal salute, and then they froze, swords raised. For a long, silent beat, they stared at one another as if sculpted in place, time suspended. The nearby Pokémon, who had been watching for entertainment, exchanged bewildered looks. They had no idea what the two were doing. Otani's lead Pokémon felt it long before the crowd did, the subtle shift in momentum building between the two fighters on the field. Both men were testing each other, looking for the faintest opening. The stalemate didn't last. Otani could no longer hold back. He struck first. In an instant, he flashed forward with a forward slash, sprinting straight at the Onion Warrior. The attack was blisteringly fast and precisely measured, only 7 points of strength expended, conserving the remaining 3 points of stamina, and the angle was awkward enough to make a clean defense difficult. The Onion Warrior didn't flinch. Calmly, he held the onion in his hand horizontally and met the blow. This was a controlled duel, not a fight to the death, so he limited himself to a single weapon. After absorbing Otani's strike, he immediately countered. Sliding toward Otani's wooden sword, he aimed to wrest the weapon free. Otani wouldn't let him win that easily. He flicked his wrist and pushed the paw hilt forward. His wooden sword slid along the Onion Warrior's green onion like a whirl, then snapped back into Otani's hand with casual precision. The move looked flashy, but it worked, instantly turning the tide. With a deft sidestep, he avoided the Onion Warrior's blow and sent the leek flying from his opponent's grasp. Without hesitation, Otani pressed the advantage, launching a fresh, relentless offensive. The two men closed, and the air filled with the flash of wood on wood, each strike a clash of strength and technique. For a moment, the whole arena was taut with tension. You could have heard the audience holding its breath. Still, despite the ferocity of the exchange, neither man pressed for a final blow. They pulled back, and the bout ended without a declared winner. Otani slowly sheathed his wooden sword and let a small smile play across his face. The difference in skill had been plain to see. The Onion Warrior had held himself back the entire time, never once taking the initiative. The swordplay demonstration had been for fun, but with Otani's help, it turned into something spectacular, and, if nothing else, it restored a little of the Onion Warrior's pride. The party broke up at noon, and Frosty the Fairy let out a satisfied burp. Then, carefully, he rummaged in his small backpack and produced a vividly colored feather. "Mama, Mama," he chirped. "For Otani, a gift," he added, offering it forward. Otani held the feather up to the sunlight. It caught the light and shimmered, colors shifting like liquid fire. "This is a rainbow feather," he said, awed. "A Phoenix King feather, Ho-Oh's feather. That's incredibly rare. Frosty, where did you get it?" "Mama, Mama," Frosty repeated, as if that answered everything. Otani braced himself for the worst. Fortunately, Frosty hadn't plucked it from Ho-Oh's wing. He just picked it up off the ground. Before Otani could press for more detail, Fantasy piped up with a smug little meow. "We're friends with the Phoenix King now, too," Fantasy announced. Celebi drifted over to join them, and the three Pokémon launched into a rapid, happy conversation. They flitted from topic to topic, where they'd played, what they'd eaten, how shiny the feather was, and it took Otani a good half hour to tease the real story out of them. When he finally did, it turned out to be almost embarrassingly mundane. The adventuring party had found the feather lying on the road on their way back, and simply picked it up. How it had come to be there, and whether Ho-Oh had dropped it deliberately or accidentally, remained a mystery, but for the moment, everyone was content to admire the glittering feather and enjoy the afterglow of a well-fought show. Frost Fairy loved the feather she had found and wanted to collect it as a gift for Otani. Partway through their journey, however, they were stopped by a magnificent lion-like dog, Entei. At Yandi's urging, Entei told them to follow the guidance of the feathers to Tianqing Mountain, where they could find Feng Wang, the Phoenix King. At first, Frost Fairy was reluctant to go, but Dream's encouragement awakened her adventurous streak. She couldn't resist the call and agreed to undertake the rainbow trial. After a string of twists and narrow escapes, the little party finally reached Tianqing Mountain. There they ran into a shy Pokémon who preferred to stay hidden in the shadows. It was Mew who finally coaxed him out. When they spoke with him, they learned his name was Machado, a guide appointed by the Phoenix King to lead those chosen to take part in the rainbow trial. Machado admitted he was uneasy. This was the first time he'd ever encountered Pokémon as participants in the trial. Frosty rose to her feet and answered his doubts head-on. "We're not ordinary Pokémon," she said. "We're an adventure team, We stand for justice, oppose violence, and seek out the world's secrets. If that's the case, put the rainbow feather on that stone, and let's see what happens, Machado said. Frostmilk, Dream, Shirabi, and the others obeyed. Together, they set the feet, her on the stone. A column of multicolored energy shot into the sky. Ho-Oh, the Phoenix King, streaked across the heavens in a blaze of rainbow light, leaving a brilliant arc, a rainbow bridge, trailing in its wake. So, does that mean you're the rainbow hero? Otani asked, startled. Frostmilk, Dream, and Shirabi exchanged glances and shook their heads. No, one of them said. Ho-Oh told us the title Rainbow Hero belongs to humans. He gave us this feather because he saw us helping other Pokémon. Otani let out a relieved laugh. For a moment he'd worried they'd been elevated to some legendary status. Well, that's still amazing, he admitted, smiling as he turned the feather over in his hand. So what about the Phoenix King? Where did he go? Juan, someone prompted. A soft meow answered, Meow. No one knows, Frostmilk replied. He flew off after he spoke to us. Juan padded up and nuzzled Otani's leg, looking wistful. I wanted Ho-Oh to come back with us and play on the farm, she murmured, disappointment clear in her voice. She stayed like that for a moment, watching the fading rainbow until it disappeared from the sky. Otani hesitated for a moment, unsure what to say. He settled on something gentle. Maybe the Phoenix King just had something important to do. Meow. Menghuan's ears twitched. Really? Then next time I meet him, can I invite him to play? Her sadness evaporated into bright excitement. Otani rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know about that. Mia. She sounded a little disappointed, but only for a beat. Menghuan was, after all, an irrepressibly cheerful little thing. She bounced back almost instantly. Otani turned his attention to the single feather he still held. Are you sure you want to give this to me? He asked. Mama? The Frost Milk Fairy, half buried in a slice of cake, waved a dismissive hand. Yes, do whatever you like with it. It was meant for you anyway. She spoke with casual indifference, though she was savoring the taste. The snacks from Otani Farm were something she'd missed a lot during her days in the wild. Thank you, I love it, Otani said, smiling. He found a length of cord, threaded on some colorful beads, and tied the feather into the strand. Then he hung the little charm around his neck, glanced at his reflection, and nodded in satisfaction. Otani slipped the rainbow feather over his head and felt a warm, undefinable comfort spread through him. It was like sinking into a hot spring. Every pore seemed to open, tension draining away. His thoughts sharpened, his mind felt clearer and quicker. Turning, he found the three youngest members of the adventuring party sprawled across the table, bellies round and faces content. The big plate of snacks was completely empty. He still couldn't fathom how they managed to cram that much food in. The housekeeper arrived with a bottle of digestive medicine, but the trio refused it at first, insisting they wanted to savor the satisfaction of being full. The housekeeper planted her hands on her hips, scowled, and proceeded to force the medicine into their mouths despite their protests. When that was over, she sat them down and gave them a half-hour lecture on common sense and digestion. The Frost Fairy tried to slip away, but a sudden psychic pull stopped her in her tracks. The three little ones turned to Otani with pleading, hopeful eyes, like people clutching at a last straw. Otani only whistled lightly, glanced up at the sky as if nothing mattered, tucked his hands behind his back, and strolled out of the room. When the housekeeper gets angry and starts scolding, nobody dares to step in. You'd only end up being scolded, or worse, alongside her. Outside in the yard, the butler Ai Guanxi was guiding a group of children as they carefully chose their favorite Pokémon from the farm. When he saw Dagu, Otani, appear, he smiled and gave a respectful nod. The children, polite and well-behaved, greeted Otani in unison. Otani returned each greeting with a warm, gentle smile, answering them one by one. At that moment, Otani, with nothing else to do, joined the others to watch the children pick their Pokémon. A chubby little boy was immediately drawn to a lively, endearing creature, a small Lada. Its round body was covered in soft, velvety fur, and its large, bright eyes shone with curiosity. The boy approached eagerly, clearly hoping to make a friend, but the little Lada showed no interest. When the boy stepped closer, it turned away and cocked its head as if to say, "Don't bother me." Undeterred, the boy only became more determined. He summoned his courage and said softly, "Hello, little Lada. My name is Alec. Can I be your friend?" Instead of warming to him, Alec's tentative, nervous manner seemed to put the already irritable Lada off even more. With a decisive flick, it turned its back on him and refused to look his way. Alec felt a flush of disappointment, but he didn't give up. He kept pace behind the little Rattata, following her wherever she went and chattering non-stop about his ambitions, about becoming an exceptional Pokémon trainer. The constant stream of words finally wore on the Rattata. She stopped, turned to face him, bared her teeth, and raised her claws in a clear attempt to frighten the persistent human away. Alec, to her surprise, didn't flinch. If anything, he looked thrilled. "Rattata," he cried, eyes bright, "you want to compete? All right, let's do this. I'll go all the way. Let's have a proper duel." He had clearly misread her intent, but his refusal to back down in the face of a challenge was impossible not to respect. Even more startling was the change in him. He seemed almost reborn, charged with an eager, fighting spirit. The little Rattata, who had started the encounter with a poor opinion of him, found herself looking at Alec with something like admiration. Otani stepped back and watched the amusing scene unfold, his mind drifting back to that unforgettable moment, the first time he'd ever caught a Pokémon in the wild. Little Rattata glanced up at him, hopeful for guidance or a command, but Otani only smiled and stayed silent. He knew it was better to let them face this on their own. Too much interference wouldn't help them grow. With no other option, the small Rattata accepted the situation and launched into a battle unlike anything Otani had seen it use before. It didn't rely on flashy or powerful moves, just simple, relentless collisions. Alex showed no fear and refused to yield. Instead of dodging, he met Rattata head-on, literally charging with his skull. Otani nearly choked in surprise. He rubbed his eyes and stared at Alec, incredulous. How could that little creature's head be so hard? It was astonishing. That's the thing about this world of Pokémon, full of surprises and strange, wonderful things. You could actually see the beginnings of a charging technique being used by a human. A crude prototype, but one that suggested real potential. With training and refinement, someone could learn to master it. Alec and the Rattata collided like two small bulls, charging at each other again and again, as if determined to knock the other down. Neither gave an inch. With each impact, they grew more excited. Dust rose in clouds around them, and the scene was almost riotous with energy. It was a reminder that humans could pick up their own unusual moves and fight with them. Alec was no exception. After a fierce struggle, Alec somehow managed to defeat the powerful Rattata. Otani watched, surprised and inwardly impressed. This kid is stubborn. He hadn't expected Alec's grit and fearless spirit to carry him through. In truth, the Rattata had let the outcome happen. It had already recognized Alec long before the fight began. Otani realized then that the Pokémon's surrender had been deliberate. Around them, the other children were similarly finding their first partners. The butler handed out Pokémon guides and supplementary supplies as everyone began to prepare for what lay ahead. The children waved and laughed as they said their goodbyes to Otani and to their butler brother. Their Pokémon chirped and patted around their feet, eager and bright-eyed. Otani offered them a gentle smile, and the butler brother straightened his shoulders, but couldn't hide the warmth in his gaze. With backpacks settled and Pokémon at their sides, the children turned toward the road ahead and set off together, their footsteps light with excitement and the promise of new adventures. Chapter 170. New neighbors come to visit. The tropical dragon's bananas are delicious. After seeing the children off, Otani lingered at the front door and peered through the window. When he realized the training session had ended, he strolled into the room without hurry. Frost Milk Fairy and the others shot him resentful looks, which he ignored as he set to work on the day's tasks. The next morning, Otani rose, called a greeting to the onion warriors who were exercising in the yard, and went to wash up. He was heading downstairs for breakfast when the doorbell rang. Otani had been sitting on the sofa, lost in thought, when a crisp chime pulled him back to the present. He looked around, disoriented for a moment, and only then registered that the sound had come from his own front door. It wasn't entirely his fault he'd been slow to react. Visits were rare on weekdays, Yeah, and even when people did come by, they usually avoided the front entrance. They rarely bothered to ring the bell. So when it did ring this morning, Otani couldn't help but wonder, who could it be? Filled with questions, Otani pushed himself up and went to the door. When he stepped outside, he found a graceful, cultivated tropical dragon standing by the farm gate. It was clearly well tended. Its health was obvious from the large, plump fruits hanging from it, which gave off an inviting, fruity scent. Otani studied the creature with obvious admiration. His eyes then moved to the young man standing beside the tropical dragon. Blonde-haired and blue-eyed, he looked about the same age as Otani. Otani cleared his throat and called politely, "Hello, can I help you?" The young man inclined his head with a modest smile and answered softly, "Hi, I'm the new farmer around here, Jeremy Wade. I'm a biologist, and I'm also a passionate angler." Otani felt a flicker of surprise. In the world of Pokémon, a surname often carried weight. It could mean wealth, nobility, or a notable family legacy. He couldn't help thinking of recent examples. Yulongdu had been like that, and so had Daguyu. Jeremy's last name made him wonder what, if anything, lay behind this newcomer. Otani couldn't help but be curious. Why would a man who was both a biologist and an extreme fishing enthusiast come all the way out here to set up a farm? It made little sense. Still, Otani followed his own rule of not poking into other people's business. If the man wasn't causing trouble, why make a fuss? On the surface, he stayed polite. He offered a warm smile and said, "Mr. Wade, nice to meet you. I'm Otani Yu, glad to meet you." Despite his private confusion, his expression was sincere. Jeremy Wade returned the smile and spoke earnestly. "Hello, Mr. Otani. I'm sorry to bother you. I've heard you're the best farmer around, and I really admire your work. Would it be possible for me to visit your farm? If it's inconvenient, I apologize in advance. I want to learn from you so I can run my own farm better." Otani felt no ill intent from Miwad, so he gladly invited him onto the farm. He gave a quick wink to the housekeeper, who nodded and motioned for Mew and Celebi to stay out of sight for a while. Then she moved briskly to lay out tea and snacks. Even though Otani didn't sense any hostility, he remained careful, better safe than sorry. He led Miwad on a leisurely tour, showing him each area and facility in turn and answering every question with patience. When they reached the flower field, Miwad caught sight of a butterfree fluttering among the blooms. His eyes lit up, but good manners kept him from dashing forward to inspect it on his own. After Otani gave a small, approving nod, Miwad picked up a magnifying glass and approached the insect. He studied it intently, sometimes marveling, sometimes falling into thought, completely absorbed in the observation. Long after the butterfree had gone about its business, Miwad finally set the magnifying glass down and said softly, "Ah, this is truly wonderful, Mr. Otani." "Otani, do you know why I want to become a biologist?" Miwad asked, voice soft with wonder. "It's because this world is full of breathtaking creatures. Pokémon are among the most magical of them all. They hold so many mysteries just waiting to be uncovered. It's a shame my life and knowledge are so limited. I'm afraid I'll only ever scratch the surface." Otani smiled but said nothing. It wasn't that he didn't want to answer. He simply didn't know what to say and let the silence stand. After a quick tour of the farm, Otani led Miwad into the living room. Tea and snacks were already laid out on the table. They settled in and fell into conversation, which soon turned to cultivation techniques. As the topic shifted, Otani suddenly seemed wide awake. The ideas Miwad shared were something he could apply elsewhere, and the possibilities excited him. Miwad blinked, clearly impressed. "I never would have guessed you, Otani, have made such progress in cultivation." Otani laughed. "And you're not doing badly yourself, Miwad." They exchanged amused looks. "But really," Otani said, warming to the subject, "you've taken exceptional care of the tropical dragon." "It's definitely one of the best Pokémon I've ever seen," Otani said, staring at the tropical dragon curled up beside Miwad. He couldn't help admiring it sincerely. Miwad laughed softly. "The tropical dragon was my first partner. I've been taking care of it since I was a kid. Hey, Otani, do you want to try one of the fruits it grows?" Otani's eyes lit up. He'd already been eyeing the fruit hungrily, but he still hesitated for a moment. "Is that really okay?" "Of course," Miwad replied. "My tropical dragon has the harvest ability. Even if you pick a fruit, More will grow soon. He reached out and stroked the dragon's head. The Pokémon craned its neck obediently, revealing a cluster of ripe fruit tucked beneath its scales. Miwad plucked a banana and handed it to Otani. Otani took it with both hands and peeled it carefully. The sweet tropical scent hit him at once. He took a small bite, and the flavor was exquisite, rich, concentrated, and surprisingly delicate. He closed his eyes for a second, savoring it. Seeing Otani enjoy the fruit, the tropical dragon seemed delighted, letting out a soft, pleased rumble. The tropical dragon couldn't help but edge closer to Otani, then gently nuzzled its cheek against his, a clear show of affection. Otani tried a piece of the dragon's fruit and was instantly hooked by its unique sweetness. He found himself reaching for another bite. Before he could, Ibrahimovic, quick as lightning, sank his teeth in and devoured most of it, leaving only a tiny sliver. Otani stared at him in surprise. Ibrahimovic was notoriously picky about food, always insisting on eating only what he cooked himself, so seeing him devour the dragon's banana was completely unexpected. That evening, Otani warmly invited Miwad to join him for dinner. Miwad declined at first, but Otani's enthusiasm was hard to resist, and he eventually stayed. Otani prepared several of his signature dishes, and Miwad was so pleased he kept praising Otani's cooking. "Your cooking is amazing, better than my cooks at home," Miwad said. Otani smiled. "If you like it, have some more." After lunch and a short rest, Miwad stood up to leave. He invited Otani to visit his farm whenever he had time, left the address, climbed onto the tropical dragon, and waved until he was out of sight. Otani watched him go, and only when Miwad had completely disappeared did he glance down at his shadow. Darkrai popped its head out from the darkness beneath him and gave a small shake, signaling that everything was clear. Only then did Otani allow himself to relax. Their past lessons had taught him to be suspicious of others. If he hadn't stayed alert, he'd have been a fool. Fortunately, Miwad had shown no ill intent and hadn't left anything behind on the farm. High above the ground, Miwad sat on the tropical dragon's back, grinning. "Tropical dragon, once our farm's up and running, we'll have a steady life. We can do whatever we want out here. I don't think anyone will find us in a place that is remote." "Yeah," the tropical dragon replied softly, echoing his mood. Go home," Miwad cried, waving his arms with delight. The tropical dragon surged forward and, picking up speed, soon vanished over the horizon. Chapter 171, Miwad's Farm Planning. Early morning sunlight poured through the window and warmed the fields at Dagu. Everything felt unusually calm. Otani stood at the farm gate, drawing in the cool, clean air. A rare sense of contentment settled over him. Yesterday's visit from the new neighbor had felt like a brief disturbance, and now the place had returned to its usual quiet. That peace didn't last long. The next day, Otani received an invitation from Miwad to come out to his farm. Curiosity and a little impatience stirred in him. What could Miwad's place possibly look like? When he arrived, Otani was stunned. The view that met him was staggering. Miwad's farm was far larger and more elaborately laid out than Otani had expected, easily several times the size of all three farms Otani owned combined. The scale of it left no doubt in his mind that Miwad must come from an extremely influential family, perhaps even the family's principal heir. Otherwise, how could anyone afford a holding this vast? Otani couldn't help but ask, a hint of doubt in his voice. "Miwad, you bought so much land right at the start. Isn't that a little impulsive?" Miwad scratched the back of his head and gave an awkward, sheepish smile. "I didn't really think it through," he admitted. "The price was low, so I just bought it. Leaving it fallow can't hurt, right?" He patted the tropical dragon at his side as if that gesture confirmed his innocence. Otani hung back and muttered under his breath, "What a rich man." He admired Miwad's casual generosity, but the feeling was mixed with helplessness. For Miwad, spending a chunk of money like that seemed no big deal, almost a habit. The gap between them felt like an invisible barrier. Ordinary people couldn't even imagine dropping that kind of money on land. When Otani finally stepped onto the farm, all he saw was barren soil and nothing else. Otani gave Miwad a helpless look. Miwad must have noticed his unease. He flashed a cheeky grin. "Hey, don't stare at me like that," he said. "This is my first time getting into farming. I honestly don't know where to start, so I asked you to come over and give me some advice. Otani couldn't help but grumble. You're not asking for advice. You're asking me to run the whole farm for you. To his surprise, Miwad's face lit up as if he'd struck gold. Yes, Otani, why don't you run it for me? I'll pay a generous wage. You name your price, he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. Otani waved him off. No, I'm already too busy with my own farm to take on anything else. Running a farm required time and energy, and it came with all kinds of headaches. He didn't want to saddle himself with more. He'd worked hard to get his place where it was, and he wasn't about to jeopardize that. Seeing Otani refuse, regret flickered across Miwad's face. Otani forced a smile and, though a little reluctant, steered the conversation onto safer ground. So, Miwad, what do you plan to do with the farm? He asked, sounding serious. Miwad rubbed his chin, thought for a beat, then grinned. What about breeding tropical dragons? Otani rolled his eyes. That's not a great idea. For one thing, tropical dragons aren't even a dragon-type Pokémon, and they're still very rare. If you tried to dedicate a whole farm to them, the costs would be astronomical. They only bear fruit twice a year, unless you specifically breed for a high-yield trait, and even then they max out at 4 harvests annually. A real farm needs steady income to survive. Miwad waved off the concern. I don't think tropical dragons are that expensive. Otani went quiet, speechless. A slow wash of helplessness went through him as he remembered, he'd almost forgotten, this sponsor didn't care about money. If Miwad really wanted something, he probably could make it happen. Otani quietly abandoned the original plan in his mind. He had decided it was completely unsuited to Miwad's current financial situation and needed to be redesigned around what the farm could realistically afford. After a long pause for thought, he finally spoke. If we can raise enough capital, growing tropical dragon fruit on the farm is an option worth considering. Dragon fruit is a rare biological resource with real value and potential. Its market price has stayed high, and it's treated as a luxury fruit, which speaks to its status and steady consumer demand. With rising living standards and a greater interest in healthy foods, demand for this distinctive high-end fruit is likely to keep growing. If we can produce and market top-quality dragon fruit, the business prospects should be very promising. He then went on to outline the practical steps and ideas he had in mind. Otani assumed the other man wasn't short of money, so it made sense to recommend the pricier options. Miwad, obedient as ever, held a small notebook and listened to every word, nodding occasionally to show he understood. Otani went on, the most important thing is to build yourself a comfortable home first. That will make it easier to manage and care for the farm, and you'll have a warm place to come back to. Miwad carefully closed his notebook, nodded, and said, Yes, I already have a rough plan for that. Otani gave a slight approving nod, and then ran through a few key points that needed special attention. When he finished explaining everything, he said his goodbyes. Miwad walked him to the door, watched him vault up onto the powerful Kintaro, and waved as he rode off into the distance. Seeing Otani's figure grow smaller, Miwad couldn't help but sigh. Ah, Mr. Otani. Otani is really a kind person, don't you think, Tropical Dragon? The dragon beside him replied obediently, with a soft, drawn-out, ah, its tone warm and reverent, as if full of affection and respect for Otani. Chapter 172. Rotom's Cell Phone. The next day, a massive construction crew arrived at Miwad's farm. There were so many workers that Otani could see them busily at work in the distance. They moved with a clear division of labor, cooperating smoothly and making astonishingly fast progress. Otani couldn't help but sigh. This was the power of money. He didn't pay much attention to the others and got on with his own work. Crouching down, he studied the mole before him and said softly, Mouse, I need your help today. At Otani's voice, the mole craned its head, wagged it from side to side, and let out an eager little cry. Yo-hoo! It was clearly excited and full of anticipation. To be honest, Otani had always been curious about what a mole's body looked like underground. It was one of those unsolved mysteries of the Pokémon world, and every time he thought about it, he felt a strong urge to investigate. Otani gently stroked the little mole's head and smiled. Thanks for your hard work, he said. The mole felt Otani's warmth and care, his cheeks flushed with happiness. Helping Otani finish the task felt meaningful to him, and a quiet understanding and trust grew between them. The mole puffed 2 warm breaths from his nostrils, blood racing with excitement. Gathering all his strength, he set to work renovating the field. Wherever he tunneled, the earth loosened and turned rich and soft, perfect for planting. Before long, he'd finished nearly half the area that needed work. If Otani had done it alone, it would have taken him weeks. Then, without warning, a mysterious, dazzling light began to surround the tireless mole. As the glow faded, the original mole had transformed into 3 stronger moles. "Woohoo!" the 3 shouted, voices bright with pride and joy. Otani stood nearby, watching with a gentle smile. "Well done, you 3, he said softly. The evolved, 3-eared hamster had proven incredible. Its work speed had doubled, and it finished the land renovation task assigned for the day before noon. To reward the trio for their excellent work, Otani had prepared their favorite foods. The 3 hamsters dug in happily, occasionally rubbing themselves against him to show gratitude and affection. They let out little, joyful squeaks, "Yoo-hoo!" as if to tell Otani how satisfied they were. Otani glanced at Sandra's cute, spoiled expression and laughed. "Sandra, you really are a little ham who loves to act like a spoiled child." The hamsters seemed to understand and smiled contentedly. They knew, deep down, that being with Otani and helping him was the happiest thing for them. Just then Miwad came running onto the farm. "Otani, Otani," he called, spotting him from a distance, and sprinting over so fast he nearly tripped. Miwad had been referring to the stones Otani had just cleared from the ground, and for a moment he froze, cheeks reddening. Fortunately, the tropical dragon at his side nudged him gently, sparing him the embarrassment. Otani rose slowly, a faint smile on his lips. "What's the rush, Miwad? Is something wrong? Is it urgent?" he asked softly. Miwad returned the smile, though there was something sly about it. "Ha! Nothing serious. I actually came to thank you for the advice you gave me yesterday, and I brought you a little something." His voice dropped conspiratorially. Before he could say more, a high, indignant voice piped up from inside the package. "Load 'em! Load 'em! It's so hot in here!" Both Otani and Miwad jumped. Miwad made a frantic, almost comical attempt to quiet the sound, but it was too late. He sighed and shook his head. "Since we've been discovered," he said, then carefully undid the wrapping. A tiny, delicate Pokémon slipped out and hovered between them, humming with a soft blue light. It was a Rotom, only instead of the usual red, its glow was an unusual cerulean. It buzzed excitedly, repeating its name, "Lotum! Lotum!" Miwad chuckled and gestured toward the little creature. "Meet Lotum," he said. "I thought you might like a companion. He's a bit temperamental, but loyal." Otani blinked, intrigued and amused. The blue Rotom darted around him once, then settled on his shoulder as if claiming him already, its tiny face bright with curiosity. Otani couldn't help but laugh. "I didn't expect a gift like this," he admitted. "Thank you. He's beautiful and rare." Lotum chirped again, as if in agreement, the blue glow of its body flickering like a living lantern. The awkwardness evaporated, replaced by something warmer. The quiet pleasure of an unexpected friendship taking shape. "Mivard, this is blatant abuse," Rotom snapped, glaring at Mivard after squirming free from the package. It kept up a running protest as if it had been terribly wronged. Mivard forced a nervous smile. "Aha, Otani, what do you think? This is the latest model of the Rotom phone. Rotom, why don't you introduce yourself to Otani?" At the command, Rotom straightened and cleared its throat, suddenly all charm and poise. It launched into a polished spiel, rattling off features, specs, and little anecdotes about its functionality with the sort of enthusiasm a salesman reserves for product launches. At first, Otani listened politely. By the 3rd sentence, he was only half paying attention, but Rotom showed no signs of stopping. Otani glanced at Mivard, who was looking increasingly awkward. Mivard cleared his throat, leaned closer to the device, and tried to cut in. "Ahem, Rotom, Rotom, Rotom." Rotom didn't respond. Mivard, growing flustered, pressed his face nearer and raised his voice, "Rotom." The sudden shout made Rotom jump so hard it nearly leapt out of the phone. Ruffling back into composure, it snapped, indignant. "Why are you shouting so loudly, Mr. Mivard?" "Who told you to keep talking once you get started?" Mivard snapped back, refusing to be outdone. The 2 of them began bickering like children. Otani watched them, exasperated. He glanced at the 3 rats and decided he had no interest in their farce. "Hey, Otani, wait up!" Miwad called, hurrying after him and still arguing with Rotom as they walked. Otani went back into the house with a frown. The noise was maddening, a constant grinding racket that frayed his nerves. He couldn't stand it any longer. With his jaw set, he strode over to the pair, eyes hard with determination. He grabbed a roll of duct tape and, without hesitation, slapped it across the first man's mouth. The tape muffled him into a faint, helpless whine. Then Otani did the same to the other. When both were silenced, Otani inhaled deeply. The house dropped into immediate, blessed quiet. For a moment the world seemed to pause, and a small, satisfied smile crossed his face. Ah, it's finally quiet. Chapter 173, Little Lucky Egg versus Togepi. Who's cuter? Ding-ling-ling, ding-ling. In the early morning a clear, pleasant ringtone cut through the quiet. It was the alarm Otani had set the night before. As the bell rang, Rotom zipped over to the bed, chirping, "Otani! Otani! Wake up!" Otani reached a hand out from under the covers, caught Rotom in one smooth motion, and turned the alarm off. He yawned and mumbled, "Morning, Rotom." "Good morning, Otani." Rotom answered cheerfully. A soft, tinkling voice replied, "Mana, mana!" Manaphy popped out from under a small quilt and flung herself into Otani's arms. He stroked her head gently and smiled. "Good morning to you too, Manaphy." Sunlight streamed through the window and warmed the room, illuminating Otani and his companions. A new day had begun. Xiaofudan carefully straightened his bed while clutching his Zazai doll. Dagu quickly folded his own quilt. Seeing the two little ones looking up at him with eager, hopeful faces, he couldn't help but smile fondly. "You did great, little Fudan. Almost there." Otani crouched slowly, gently ruffling their heads. "Not bad, not bad." "Pokia!" Little Fudan and Almost All chirped back, pleased with the praise. Otani stood and led the Pokémon out of the room. Venusaur fell in at the rear, moving carefully to shut the door behind them. The scene looked so warm and domestic, it could have been a family portrait. When breakfast was ready, Otani strolled to the doorway with a smile and called, "Onion Warrior! Breakfast time!" A sharp "Ka!" answered him. The Onion Warrior had been practicing his moves. At the sound of his master's voice, he hurriedly stopped and put his stance away. I felt a little annoyed inwardly. Didn't he have the nerve to come over and call me to breakfast like that? With the Onion Warrior the last to take his place, Otani announced cheerfully, "Let's eat." Every Pokémon answered together, their voices full of eager anticipation for the meal. After breakfast, everyone picked up their favorite foods and ate with wide smiles. Each bite seemed full of happiness, making it hard for anyone to stop. On that bright morning, they shared a simple, contented joy. When the meal was done, Otani went back to looking after the little ones. He cradled Manaphy in his left arm, held Xiaofudan in his right, and had several other dolls nestled around him. Frosty perched lightly on his broad shoulders, grinning. Her small hands rested gently against Otani's neck as if she were savoring the breeze. Dream and Celebi circled around him, darting playfully and occasionally teasing the smallest, Manaphy, who erupted into peals of clear, delighted laughter. Manaphy giggled in Otani's warm embrace, then wriggled excitedly to join the game with Mew and Celebi. Watching the three little Pokémon play together filled Otani's chest with a soft, grateful warmth. "Mew, Celebi, you three must take good care of Manaphy. He's still young," Otani called after the little trio as they flew off, his voice bright with affection. At Otani's call, Mew, Celebi, and Manaphy all turned at once and answered in tiny, tinkling voices, "Mew be Mana." Then the three little ones tore off across the farm, chasing one another. They darted through the flower beds, sprang over the grass, and played hide-and-seek among the fruit trees. Their laughter rang through the fields. The place felt alive with energy. Otani stood back, a soft smile on his face and admiration in his eyes as he watched them. Seeing them play filled him with a quiet, warm emotion. He noticed Xiaofudan and Changbawa lingering at the edge of the lawn and asked with a gentle smile, "Why don't you two go play with them?" Almost Doll shook her head shyly. "No," she murmured. She didn't want to leave Otani. If she went, he would be left alone. Xiaofudan climbed up and hugged Otani's neck, pressing his head against Otani's cheek as if promising he'd always stay. Feeling both Xiaofudan's and Almost Doll's affection, a rush of warmth filled Otani's chest. He reached out and stroked their heads tenderly. Psyduck trailed right behind Manaphy, like the shadow of a smaller, wobblier friend. No matter where Manaphy wandered, Psyduck followed without hesitation, but his short legs made it hard for him to keep up. Eventually, he had to plop down on the ground and watch as Manaphy darted ahead. Even sitting there, Psyduck's eyes never left Manaphy's smiling face. Seeing that joyful expression filled him with contentment. Meow? Menghuan turned at the sound and spotted something moving in the bushes. A tiny Togepi was crawling out, blinking curiously at the newcomers. The three little ones edged forward to inspect the newcomer carefully. Togepi, Pokopi, looked a little nervous. Its body trembled, but it still lifted its head and squeaked softly, "Poko." Otani hung back and studied the Togepi for a moment. Then recognition flickered across his face. That wasn't just any Togepi. It was the very rare Togepi known for having an awful temper. Otani felt a headache throb at the sight of Togepi. Her temperament was so innate and unmistakable that dealing with her would be a headache, yet he couldn't bring himself to hand her over to the Alliance. He stepped forward, cradling the little lucky egg. When Togepi caught sight of him, something in her expression shifted, but she immediately put on an act of innocence and offered a chirpy "Poke," as if she didn't know him. Otani only sighed. "Pokepi, stop pretending. I already recognized you." The cheerful look on Togepi's face dropped the moment she noticed the egg in Otani's arms. Jealousy flitted across her eyes, and she could no longer hide it. She abandoned the disguise and turned to leave. "Wait!" Otani called. Togepi hesitated, then stopped. An odd flutter of anticipation rose in her. She wondered what he would say next. "If you don't have anywhere else to go," Otani said, forcing the words, "why don't you stay here with me?" He spoke with difficulty but finality. He had made his decision. Togepi was a potential destabilizing factor, and he would rather keep her where he could watch her than let the Alliance take her away. From what he'd read in the reports, Togepi liked to play pranks and tease every trainer she met, but she had never actually hurt anyone. That gave Otani hope. Maybe she wasn't completely corrupted. He kept wondering what could have made her hate humans so fiercely. She went out of her way to cause trouble for every trainer she encountered, as if she carried a deep resentment against people. Otani decided to give her a chance. He wanted to learn what she really felt beneath the mischief. He believed that with enough patience, love, and understanding, Togepi might change and find a reason to care about life again. At the word love, something like happiness and excitement flickered across her face. She made a small chirrup, and then suddenly snapped, "Humans are all liars," and darted into the bushes. Otani reached out, trying to stop her, but she was gone. He let his hand fall and sighed. An unqualified trainer can leave wounds on a Pokémon that never fully heal. Chapter 174, Mewad Farm and the Tropical Dragon Express. Otani stood at the gate of Mewad Farm with his jaw hanging open and his eyes as wide as saucers, utterly stunned, frozen in place as if someone had pinned him there. It had only been a week, just 1 week. Could this be the terrifying power of that legendary money ability? Mewad, hands on his hips and grinning with obvious pride, looked down at his land. "Well," he asked, "not bad, huh? My farm turned out great?" Compared to a week ago, the place had been transformed beyond recognition. The orchard now brimmed with every kind of fruit tree imaginable, a dazzling, almost endless array. Otani even spotted a number of extremely rare and valuable fruit species that normally only appear in legends. Here they were, planted casually alongside ordinary trees with no special protection. And to top it off, roughly 200 tropical dragons were ambling through the rows, lounging and wandering through the orchard as if this had always been their home. Some of the tropical dragons were craning their necks to peck at the ground, others were staring idly at the sky, and a few were tumbling and sparring with one another. In the short time since they'd been gathered, Mewad had somehow assembled 200 of them. Otani stood there, impressed and a little unnerved. He had always thought highly of Mewad's capabilities, but this exceeded even that high estimate. Putting together an operation like this would take not only a huge financial outlay, but also exceptionally deep and wide-ranging connections. The resources behind it were on a scale ordinary people rarely saw. Otani found himself more curious than ever about who Mewad really was. At the same time, the whole setup had clearly been rushed. At first glance it looked impressive, but the closer he looked, the more flaws he found. The fruit trees had been planted in haste, many hadn't been properly prepared, and several showed signs of rough handling during transplanting. They already looked a little lethargic. Otani pointed out each problem in turn, calmly and precisely. Miwad listened intently and jotted down everything. Otani paused, stroked his chin, and thought for a moment. Then he headed back to his farm, called Bulbasaur, and the two of them walked over to Miwad's orchard. Bulbasaur sent out a wash of grassy energy, like a living field of green, to steady the struggling berries. The effect was immediate. The once wilted fruits perked up and filled out again. The nearby tropical dragons felt the pulse of natural energy radiating from the grass and drifted closer, greeting the source of the energy with obvious excitement. Bulbasaur acknowledged them with a little nod, then returned to Otani's side. "Leave them like this for now," Otani said, watching the trees with satisfaction. He inspected the fruit and smiled. "Miwad, I have an idea. Why don't you try something new?" Miwad looked up, curious. "Oh, what kind of idea?" "You could start a courier service that specializes in delivering delicate goods," Otani explained. "With Pokémon like Bulbasaur stabilizing and preserving perishable items during transit, and the tropical dragons handling long-distance transport, you could offer a reliable way for farmers and merchants to move fruit and other fragile cargo safely." Miwad was puzzled for a moment, then realization dawned on him. "You mean asking Tropical Dragon to handle the deliveries?" he asked, surprised. "Exactly," Otani replied. "There isn't a formal logistics network anywhere in the Alliance. If you keep expanding Tropical Dragon without a steady revenue stream, you'll end up under a lot of pressure." Miwad nodded. He'd poured almost all the pocket money he'd saved over the years into building the farm, and he'd run away from home without telling his family. There was no one he could ask for help. The suggestion suddenly made a lot of sense. He slapped his hands together, eyes bright. "Then I'll start a courier service. Tropical Dragon Express. Otani, this was your idea, so I'll give you a cut of the profits." Otani didn't refuse. There was no reason to. He had been considering it for a long time, but lately he simply didn't have the energy to follow through. Still, there was one thing Otani felt he had to say before leaving. "By the way, those fruit trees are rare species. You must take good care of them. The farm's main income will come from those trees." Otani couldn't help but add the warning. Miwad nodded solemnly and promised to look after them. After one last look around and finding nothing more to say, Otani said his goodbyes and left. Miwad mounted his tropical dragon and streaked off toward the city to register a company. Back at the farm later, Otani pulled together notes on procedures and pricing models for an express delivery business from his previous life and sent them to Miwad on his phone. A quick thumbs up came back in reply. Coming downstairs afterward, Otani noticed one person missing and asked the butler where she was. The butler thought for a moment and answered, "She's by the lake." When Otani walked to the water's edge, he found Xiaofudan sitting on a low stone, looking subdued. A small doll sat beside her, its head tilted in a way that made it seem as if it were murmuring comfort in a soft, almost inaudible voice. "What's the matter, little lucky egg? Are you worried about something?" Otani asked softly, cradling Xiaofudan in his arms. Xiaofudan, Togepi, whose nickname meant Little Lucky Egg, gave a small, melancholy chirp. "Pocha." Otani stroked the shell gently. "It's not your fault. You don't have to blame yourself." He didn't really know how to handle Togepi's sadness. He had no idea what the egg Pokemon had gone through before, so he couldn't make any assumptions. Still, his quiet reassurance seemed to help. Togepi relaxed a little in his arms. Togepi was naturally a very caring Pokemon. Whatever it had encountered must have been upsetting, but this was something it would have to face. Life wasn't always smooth, and sometimes the only choice was to keep going. A few days later, Miwad's express delivery company officially opened, set up right on the farm. Since Otani was Miwad's only friend there, he was the only guest invited to the ribbon cutting. The whole ceremony was a small, two-person affair. At the opening, Otani suggested they offer 3 different delivery options. Pidgeot Express for rapid air delivery, a standard freight service for bulk shipments, and Tropical Dragon Express for direct, door-to-door delivery. Each method would have its own rate structure, with Tropical Dragon Express able to bring parcels straight to the customer's location. Point-to-point direct delivery was the fastest and safest option, but also the most expensive. The alternatives were BB Bird Express or ordinary freight couriers. He could also open a parcel collection business and, by attracting investment from across the whole alliance, turn the place into a local express storage hub. The operator would earn a cut for every package handled. Miwad wrote everything down carefully, ran the numbers, and found he still had plenty of money left. He didn't hesitate. He went straight to set it up. Chapter 175, The Onion Warrior's First Battle. Miwad was tied up running both the farm and the courier company, so he had no time to bother Otani. Life on the farm settled back into a quiet routine. Outwardly, everything was peaceful. Inside Otani, though, there was a constant, silent unease he never let show. He had been in this world for 3 years now, and the date he'd seen in that dream, the day the space-time vortex appeared, was drawing near. If he chose to be optimistic, he could tell himself that what Celebi experienced might have happened in a different parallel world and had nothing to do with his own timeline. If he chose to be realistic or pessimistic, he knew he should be ready. With the strength he had now, he ought to be able to deal with the mysterious man he suspected of suppressing the stars. The difference between him and the version of himself from the dream was vast. It felt like a world of distance. Yet Otani reminded himself of one simple fact. Although his power came from a parallel champ's template, it was still real. He was a champion in his own right. Even if he couldn't beat that mysterious figure outright, he believed he could buy time and hold out until help arrived. Besides, he wasn't entirely alone. There were 3 different peoples living on the farm, allies he could call on if things turned dangerous. Quietly, without announcing it, Otani began to prepare. The calm before the storm was brief. In his mind, the first battle was already forming. No matter how strong you are, when you're faced with overwhelming numbers, you can feel utterly powerless. My heart was heavy with worry, but life went on. I didn't want to let my anxiety show. I'd shoulder it quietly by myself. My back and waist ached from bending over so long. When I looked up, the 3 Sandrats had already reclaimed a huge swath of land in a single morning. From a distance, I could hardly see the edge. 3 Sandrats, that's enough. Don't expand anymore, I called. They heard me, squinted their little eyes, and let out cheerful chirps. Yo-hoo, yo-hoo. Then they dove back underground and came up at my feet. I crouched, patted their heads, and pulled a handful of cube-shaped treats from my pocket to feed them. Thanks for the hard work, I said. After they rested a moment, I handed the bag of seeds to one of the Sandrats and asked him to balance it on his head while we sewed together. They chirped happily. It was no trouble at all, and they were glad to help. The farm's doorbell rang again. Otani paused mid-task and glanced toward the gate. A lone figure stood there. Otani's face showed a flicker of surprise. The Ibuta siblings were busy looking after the Pokémon the Alliance had placed on the property and couldn't come to the door, so Otani gave a helpless sigh and decided to answer it himself. He smoothed his clothes without changing them and hurried over. When he opened the door, the stranger stepped forward and asked, "Hello, are you Mr. Otani?" Otani nodded. "Yes, that's me." He studied the young man. Classic trainer outfit, a bright red cap, all energy and eagerness. The newcomer grinned and practically burst out his introduction. "Great, I finally found the right place. Mr. Otani, my name is Xiaoqi. I've heard your name for a long time. I hear you're the strongest trainer around here. I've come to ask for your guidance and to challenge you." "Please give me your guidance." Xiaoqi's eyes flashed with determination. He looked positively eager for the next battle. Otani froze. The name tugged at a memory. Was it Qihong? He studied the newcomer. They wore similar league attire, but they were clearly different people. The outfit was common enough, Otani reassured himself, and the momentary confusion eased. "Mr. Otani, are you all right?" "You look distracted," Xiaoqi asked, curious. "Oh no, I'm fine. I just remembered an old friend for a second. Come in, please." Otani recovered his composure and ushered Xiaoqi into the farmhouse. In the living room, he put out some refreshments, then slipped upstairs to change into something more comfortable. When he came back down, Otani found Xiaoqi staring at Ibrahimovic with wide, admiring eyes. Ibrahimovic stood calm and proud. Eevee, however, seemed entirely unimpressed. The little Pokémon ignored Xiaoqi and was fully absorbed in a cartoon playing on the TV. "All set," Otani said. "Let's head outside first." "Okay, Mr. Otani." Xiaoqi practically bounced with excitement. When they reached the battlefield, both sides took their places. Rotom floated above the field, acting as referee. In its chirpy voice, it announced, "Lodo Lodo, both trainers are in position. Challenger Chi of Pallet Town versus Mr. Otani of Otani Farm. The battle officially begins now." As the signal sounded, Otani was the first to send out a Pokémon. "Let's see what all that training has done for you. Time to show yourself, Onion Warrior." The Pokeball popped open, and Onion Warrior leapt out, landing with steady balance. It wore its favorite hat at a jaunty angle. A gentle breeze ruffled its feathers. A toothpick was clenched in its beak. At first it looked like its wings were resting lazily on its hips, but at a moment's notice it could whip out 2 fistfuls of green onions from its waist and strike. "Oh, I've never seen this Pokémon before!" Chai exclaimed, grabbing the Pokédex and scanning the newcomer. The entry displayed plainly, "Name, Onion Warrior evolved from Farfetch'd, Kanto." This evolution results from a deep devotion to the spirit of Bushido and relentless dedication to Kendo training. Its Pokédex entry read like a vow, absolute, unwavering loyalty to protect its trainer even at the cost of its life. It belonged to 2 categories, normal and fighting, and it had a signature move, Double Sword Slash. Wielding 2 razor-sharp leeks-like blades, it could cut through massive stone in a single sweep. This evolved form had first been identified by Dr. Otani in the Kanto region, with Dr. Oak assisting in the research. "Wow, that's amazing!" Xiaoqi breathed, eyes shining as he listened to the Pokédex report. He turned to Dr. Otani with open admiration. Otani felt his face warm and instinctively reddened, even though he'd done nothing particularly heroic. Rotom, player Xiaoqi, please send out your Pokémon now, or it will be considered a forfeit," the Rotom voice reminded from the device at the edge of the field. "Oh, right, sorry, you're up, come out, Pikachu," Xiaoqi answered, flustered but steadying himself. "Pika-Pee." A red light flashed, and Pikachu sprang onto the battlefield. Facing down Farfetch'd, he showed no hint of fear, only eagerness to fight. Dr. Otani watched him closely and nodded again and again. It was obvious from his posture and expression that Pikachu had been very well trained. Farfetch'd's eyes sharpened, and its usual lazy demeanor vanished. It knew that playing the fool could lull an enemy into lowering their guard and mask its true strength, but against a truly formidable opponent, that disguise might fail. A powerful aura began to radiate from it, like a volcano on the verge of erupting. Deliberately, it reached for the 2 scallions tucked at its waist, drew them free, and gripped them firmly. In that instant, it seemed to become a fearless swordsman, poised for a life-or-death duel. Pikachu would not be outdone. It crouched on all 4s, body low to the ground as sparks danced along its cheeks. Electricity crackled across its face as it gathered charge. Its round form trembled slightly, part nervousness, part exhilaration. Pikachu had sensed Farfetch'd's fighting spirit, and without even realizing it, felt its own excitement rise. Chapter 176, A Fierce Clash. "I want to fight! Pikachu Thunderbolt!" Xiaoqi shouted. Pikachu dropped to all 4s and shot forward like a bolt of lightning, its speed so blistering it seemed to blur the air. "Onion Warrior, block!" the crowd cried. The Onion Warrior showed no sign of backing down. He crossed 2 green onions in front of his body, forming a solid, impassable guard. Pikachu's assault came in a relentless spray, but the Onion Warrior's defenses were precise. He read the attacks perfectly and met each tentative strike with his crossed leeks. He didn't pause. Swinging 1 onion forward, the Onion Warrior launched a brutal counterattack. Pikachu, however, had anticipated the move. Just as the warrior's blow came down, Pikachu used the recoil from the onion block to twist out of the way with lightning reflexes. The blade, sharp and deadly, whistled past, the tip grazing mere inches from Pikachu's flank, narrowly missing a vital strike. The duel was breathtaking, every move a careful balance of strategy and skill. Rotom watched from the sidelines, part of him anxious for Pikachu, part of him eagerly anticipating the next exchange. He flipped on his recording function and ran a quick test to make sure everything was capturing properly. After assessing the situation, Xiaoqi altered his approach. He switched to guerrilla mode. Keep distance and chip away at the Onion Warrior's stamina with ranged attacks. Pikachu, 100,000 volts, he called. Onion Warrior, dodge, then use Sword Dance. The opposing trainer snapped back. The Onion Warrior slipped away from Pikachu's lightning strike with ease and immediately launched into Sword Dance to raise his attack. When Xiaoqi saw him dodge instead of resorting to a block, a theory clicked into place. He acted fast. Pikachu, grid! Pikachu sprang up and rolled forward. Its tail unfurled an immense electric lattice behind it, a shimmering wall of lightning that flew straight at the Onion Warrior. Onion Warrior, chop through it, then follow up with II/ immediately, the other trainer ordered. The Onion Warrior didn't flinch. Calm and unhurried, he stepped forward, blade gleaming, prepared to meet the storm head-on. The Onion Warrior darted forward, the two scallions in his hands a blur as they chopped, cleaving Pikachu's electric net in an instant. Pika! Pikachu cried in surprise, but that split-second distraction let the Onion Warrior close the distance, and then he unleashed the long-ready II/ with a thunderous force. Get out of the way, Xiaoqi yelled. Pikachu reacted instantly. He flipped and sprang up, planted a paw on one of the Onion Warrior's scallions for support, and used the momentum to twist aside and avoid the blade. Onion Warrior, swallow return, Otani ordered. The Onion Warrior's movements sped up. He darted forward like a flying swallow. Xiaoqi didn't hesitate. Pikachu, Volt Attack, charge! Pikachu discharged a surge of electricity, becoming a blue streak as he shot forward. The sudden counterattack broke the Onion Warrior's swallow return and sent his tactic failing. Otani showed no mercy. Onion Warrior, launch the air blades, he ordered. The Onion Warrior brandished his onion-shaped weapon and sliced the air. Several condensed wind slashes formed, each one humming as it raced straight for Pikachu. The warrior charged in behind the blades, closing the distance at terrifying speed. Xiaoqi's heart pounded. He'd felt the Onion Warrior's lethal close combat ability and knew how dangerous it would be if Pikachu was caught within arm's reach. Hurry, Pikachu. Put as much distance between you and him as you can, he shouted. Pikachu obeyed, scrambling to flee. But the Onion Warrior was too quick. He was already gaining on the little Pokémon. Unleash 100,000 volts in front of you, Xiaoqi snapped. Pikachu didn't hesitate. He began to gather crackling electricity at once. A sudden 100,000-volt blast erupted directly ahead. The strike was blisteringly fast and landed exactly where it needed to, cutting off the Onion Warrior's path as if whoever had launched it had predicted the attack route perfectly. That level of anticipatory reading was astonishing. Otani even found himself wondering whether the person he was facing was really Xiaoqi, or the legendary Akahaki in disguise. Once again, the trainer's precise command shattered the Onion Warrior's offensive rhythm. Forced to pull back, the Onion Warriors retreated to their own side of the field. For the first time in a while, Pikachu had a precious moment to catch its breath. After the long chase, it was a bit winded, but its energy expenditure was still within acceptable limits. By contrast, the Onion Warrior looked composed and unbothered, showing no sign of fatigue at all, as if the pursuit had been nothing more than a warm-up. Xiaoqi felt the pressure building, but rather than fearing it, he grew more exhilarated. Pikachu reacted the same way. The longer it went on, the more fired up it became. Watching the pair, Otani couldn't help but smile and murmur that Pokémon really do reflect their trainers. Otani wanted to give Pikachu a little more time to recover, and Xiaoqi saw that and didn't object. They waited until Pikachu stopped panting and his energy visibly returned. Then Xiaoqi gave the order without hesitation. Pikachu, Shadow Clone, run! Pikachu sprang into action, scattering dozens of perfect duplicates across the battlefield. In an instant, the field was full of indistinguishable Pikachus, each one convincingly real. The Onion Warrior, far-fetched, was not fooled. He closed his eyes and, trusting his keen instincts, listened and felt for the real Pikachu's presence. Onion Warrior, high speed, Otani called calmly. The far-fetched obeyed immediately, surging forward like a shot arrow toward the one it had sensed. At that moment, Xiaoqi shouted, "Now, Pikachu, thunder!" The sky turned dark as an ominous ceiling of clouds gathered. A massive bolt of lightning, thick and blinding, tore down from the heavens and struck Farfetch'd with devastating force. Faced with the sudden, overwhelming blow, the Onion Warrior faltered and panicked. At the crucial moment, Otani's calm voice cut through the chaos. Onion Warrior, double sword Huajian, to the left. The Onion Warrior obeyed without hesitation, whipping its twin blades in a blurring arc to the left. The maneuver carried it out of the lightning strike. The bolt slammed into the ground where it had been aimed, throwing up a cloud of dust and a thunderous crash. Onion Warrior, close combat. From the thick smoke, the Onion Warrior relied on its mind's eye to pinpoint Pikachu's position. It closed the distance in an instant and unleashed a barrage of close-range strikes. Pikachu held up through the flurry, but, at the end, took a heavy hit and was sent flying, knocked out of the fight. Xiaoqi darted forward and with perfect timing caught the falling Pikachu. Pikachu whimpered weakly in his arms. Otani stepped over and handed Xiaoqi a bottle of Moo Moo milk. Xiaoqi thanked him, fed it to Pikachu, and watched as the little Pokémon drank its fill and quickly recovered. Pikachu blinked at the bottle in surprise, then without hesitation offered the remaining milk to Red. Pikachu piped up happily. Pikachu! It sounded almost like, "It's so delicious." Xiaoqi hugged Pikachu tightly, then took another long sip of the milk. His eyes lit up. "This is really good." Otani laughed. "Drink up, then." He went to fetch several more bottles and handed one to the Onion Warrior with a cheerful, "Quack, quack." The little creature bobbed its head in gratitude. "Thank you, my lord," it seemed to say. After they'd rested a while, Otani reached into his pocket and handed Xiaoqi a small token, a battle token. It was the farm's way of accepting a formal challenge, something Otani had made on a whim when he was bored. With the token in hand, Xiaoqi was officially set to challenge Otani's farm. As Xiaoqi and Pikachu walked away, Otani watched them go and couldn't help sighing to himself. Here really were a lot of talented people in Pallet Town. Before leaving, Xiaoqi had told Otani why so few trainers had come to challenge the farm recently. Not far from the farm, on the main route most trainers used to reach it, there was a single trainer who defeated anyone trying to pass. No one could get through without beating him first. Rumor had it that the trainer was trying to string together 999 consecutive wins, and once he'd done that, he planned to come challenge Otani himself and try to defeat him. Otani rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It struck him as an intriguing idea. Maybe he could go there. Chapter 177. The way of a trainer is to face the challenge. The next morning, Otani rose early, washed, and reluctantly climbed onto Kentaro, following the directions Xiaoqi had given him. He'd finished breakfast and packed up quickly, so he arrived well before the scheduled start of the challenge. From a short distance, he could see a small canvas tent pitched on a stretch of green beside a fork in the road. A young trainer was in the middle of the lawn, running a training routine with his Sandshrew. The boy used a short whip to mark different rhythms. With each change, the Sandshrew flowed through a series of precise moves. Their coordination was seamless, as if an invisible bond linked them. Otani didn't want to interrupt, so he hung back and watched like a curious passerby. He found himself nodding inwardly. The boy was clearly talented and had chosen a specialized path, strict with his Pokémon and even harder on himself. Otani realized the Sandshrew in front of him had been very well trained by its owner. From the few belongings the boy carried, it was clear his family wasn't wealthy. Even so, the boy did everything he could to provide the Sandshrew with the best care possible. Otani watched in silence. The boy glanced over and noticed him, but paid it little mind. After a short rest following the training, the boy ate a simple breakfast, while the Sandshrew's meal was unusually rich. As the Pokémon ate, the boy carefully recorded the session in a small notebook. When the meal was finished, he expertly massaged the Sandshrew's muscles to help it relax. Then the boy led Sandshrew to the side of the road and began stopping passing trainers. He challenged them to battle and imposed a strict condition: the loser would not be allowed to pass. Most trainers accepted the provocation. The coordination between the boy and his Sandshrew was remarkable. Almost no one could match it. By the end of the day, only one person had managed to get through. Some trainers who couldn't accept defeat had camped nearby, training day and night, desperate for a chance to avenge themselves. When Otani arrived, a crowd had already gathered around him. Those who had been unable to beat him at first had mostly drifted away, but a stubborn few kept coming back. "Sandrat, roll!" One challenger shouted. "Rada, use your ultimate fangs, now!" another cried. Rada lunged with a snarl, aiming the attack, but Sandrat curled up and slammed into him with a spinning roll. Rada's attack missed, and the blow left him unable to continue. Sandrat came away almost unscathed. "I'll challenge you again tomorrow," the defeated trainer shouted in frustration. "I'm here whenever you want," Otani replied calmly. He made a neat note of the victory in a small notebook, then tossed it into his pocket and stepped forward for the next match without hesitation. "Cammy Turtle, water gun," called the next trainer. "Sandrat, spin at high speed," Otani answered. Sandrat drew into a tight ball and spun in place so fast the air whistled. Cammy Turtle's water gun struck the spinning form, but the jets of water simply slid off the furious rotation. Stottle, Cammy Turtle's trainer, stared in surprise. "Your Sandrat isn't afraid of water," he admitted. "Mosquito, digging holes." The boy on the far side ignored the trainer opposite him and barked an order. "Sandshrew, use dig." "Squirtle, watch your step," Stottle's trainer shouted, but the warning came too late. The boy flicked the short whip in his hand and Sandshrew burst up from the ground at Stottle's side, slamming into him with a surprise dig attack. Stottle crumpled, unable to continue. His trainer scooped him up protectively. "You cruel, don't you know mole rats are terrified of water?" Stottle's trainer snapped. "So what?" the boy said without a flicker of remorse. Stottle's trainer went momentarily speechless. "Anyway, that was low. You shouldn't do that." The boy only smirked. "Heh, I'm not some delicate flower like you. You're impossible. I don't need your pity." He lowered his head and silently recorded the exchange in his notebook. Then, looking up as if the conversation wasn't over, he added, "By the way, aren't you being a bit strict? And why make Sandshrew fight with a training device anyway? Oh, I'm Xiao Zhang. What's your name?" Stottle's trainer sighed inwardly. He didn't want to waste any more energy on this annoying kid. I turned around, and since no one was coming to challenge us, I gave Sandshrew a quick massage to help him recover, then ate something to get my own energy back. Squirtle's trainer, however, showed no sign of embarrassment about being ignored. He strolled over and greeted Sandshrew like an old friend. "Hello, Sandshrew." Sandshrew, with a temperament completely unlike his taciturn trainers, chirped happily in reply. "By the way," the boy added casually, "it's been so long, and you still haven't told me your name." I felt helpless. I couldn't get rid of this guy. I was hopeless at handling people like him. "Xiaoming," I said. "Xiaoming," he repeated. "Look, I'll be honest. Even though you're cold by nature, you treat your Pokémon really well. Sandshrew is strong, and he's not afraid of water." Hearing him praise Sandshrew made my face light up with pride. "Of course," I said. "Sandshrew was the first Pokémon I ever caught. The day we met, we swore we'd become the strongest trainers and the strongest Pokémon in the world. For that dream, we can endure any pain. Rain or shine, there's only one way forward if we want him to be the most powerful Pokémon in the world," Xiaoming said, eyes bright and voice full of conviction. "We'll risk everything to make that happen." "But isn't that cruel to Sandshrew?" the other trainer protested. "I thought the bond between us and our Pokémon was supposed to be like family, not this." Xiaoming snorted. "That's a shallow way to look at it. This is a necessary process to forge skin as hard as steel. I've even had special, expensive food made just for him." While they argued, Sandshrew padded over, grabbed 2 small dumbbells, and started working out. Stottle watched curiously and reached for the dumbbell beside him, only to discover it was far heavier than it looked. He tried to lift it with both paws, lost his balance, and ended up pinned awkwardly beneath the weight, unable to move. Sandshrew's little face darkened at the sight. He set his dumbbells down, strode over, and effortlessly lifted the one crushing Stottle, freeing him in an instant. The weight on Stottle vanished and he relaxed, straightening up smoothly. "Well, that was close. I thought I was a goner," he muttered. Squirtle looked like he'd survived a catastrophe. "Come on, don't be so dramatic," Sandshrew scoffed. "This is the lightest one." He picked up his training dumbbells and went back to his workout. Unlike their trainers, the 2 little Pokémon hit it off immediately. As they trained, Sandshrew chattered to Squirtle about the funny and interesting things he'd seen while out with Xiao Ming. Before long, Sandshrew, nicknamed Xiaozhong, shamelessly pitched his tent right beside Xiao Ming's. Xiao Ming had no choice but to let him. As long as it didn't interfere with his training, it was fine. Otani watched from the sidelines, amused. The boy probably didn't even notice he'd already made a friend. Chapter 178, Get Out of the Way. I'm going to start pretending to be cool. Otani watched for 3 days and found Xiao Ming's routine didn't change. The only difference from before was that he now had a new, talkative companion, Xiaozhong. Xiaozhong was the kind of person whose bright cheerfulness and almost absurd naivety made people let down their guard without even realizing it. Gradually, Xiao Ming, who was usually reserved, came to accept him and tacitly acknowledged his presence. When they had free time, they'd sit and chat about their dreams. Xiaozhong's was simple and earnest. He wanted to become an excellent Pokémon breeder. After he'd finished traveling, he planned to go back home and open a breeding house. Xiao Ming's dream, on the other hand, was to be the strongest trainer in the world. He'd been on the road for 2.5 years, but astonishingly, he hadn't challenged a single gym yet. Honestly, Xiao Ming, you don't have to be so obsessed with getting 999 wins in a row, Xiaozhong said bluntly one afternoon. That's almost impossible. It's too hard. Xiao Ming barely reacted. Plenty of people had told him the same thing before, and he always gave the same answer. If it's too easy, it's not worth doing. Well said. A voice behind them made Xiaozhong jump. Ah, it's that weird uncle who's been peeking around. He blurted, spinning to look. The man standing there was the one he'd seen before. Otani's face twitched with annoyance at being called uncle. I'm only 22, he thought, though the long hours of farm work had darkened his skin and roughened his features enough that he could be mistaken for someone older. He clenched his fists but forced a smile. Xiao Ming, however, didn't react as naively as Xiaozhong. Who are you? He asked calmly, on guard. Traveling alone for so long had taught him not to trust strangers at first sight. Otani recovered his composure quickly. Just a passerby who got bored, he said with a shrug. I was curious and watched for a few days. A passerby? Xiao Ming eyed him suspiciously. Or would you prefer a fight? Otani asked, smiling as if suggesting a game. At that, Xiao Ming didn't hesitate. He accepted the challenge. Why not? Come on. Xiaozhong, eyeing the powerful Kentaro standing next to Otani, nudged Xiao Ming with his shoulder and lowered his voice. Don't be impulsive, Xiao Ming. Look at Kentaro. He's huge. Clearly a Pokémon that's been trained carefully. He's got to be strong. If you lose, won't your winning streak be reset? Xiao Ming hesitated for a moment, but still chose to accept the fight. Otani watched him and nodded with satisfaction. Xiaozhong had no choice but to step in as referee. The match began. For a beat, neither trainer moved. Xiao Ming frowned and spoke up. You're the challenger. You attack first. Otani blinked as if surprised. Oh, sorry. It's just been so long since I've gone first, I forgot, he said, laughing lightly. In the fields, he always let others strike first. He hadn't expected today would be different. Then his expression shifted. All right, I won't be polite. Kentaro, use Mind Hammer. Otani's face went serious, his whole demeanor changing in an instant. Before anyone could react, Kentaro lunged, fast as a shadow, and was already in front of Sandshrew. Xiao Ming cracked his whip, and the Sandshrew burrowed underground in an instant. When the danger passed, it shot back up and popped out of the earth. Sandshrew, attack! He called. He flicked the whip again and again. The Sandshrew curled into a perfect ball and began rolling across the field with blistering speed. Kentaro! Earthquake! Xiao Ming barked. Kentaro lowered his head and slammed his front hooves into the ground. The impact sent a violent tremor through the arena. Controlled and intense, the quake shook the battlefield but didn't spread beyond it. That's the ground type's ultimate move, Earthquake, Xiaozhong shouted. Jump! Xiao Ming ordered, and at the cue, the Sandshrew leapt into the air, spinning as Kenta, Rose Quake, hit the ground below. Otani's eyes flashed with recognition. This was perfect timing. Because Kentaro was channeling Earthquake, he couldn't move freely, and Sandshrew's rolling attack struck him directly. It didn't do massive damage at first, but with every successive hit from a rolling assault, the power would compound. If Otani hesitated, Kentaro could actually lose. The chance was small, but it existed, and only if Kentaro froze and let Sandshrew charge would that ever happen. "Kentaro, rock blockade," Otani called. Rocks erupted from the ground and formed a jagged barrier, cutting off Sandshrew's rolling path. The move did not strike the Sandshrew directly, but it changed the battleground enough to force the little mole rat to alter its course. Still, Xiaoming didn't flinch. He had expected this and had put his Sandshrew through intensive, specialized training. It kept rolling, using the gaps and shadows between the piled stones to close the distance toward Kentaro. After that, Xiaoming stopped giving verbal orders and relied entirely on his whip. The whip wasn't cruelty so much as a silent signaling tool. It hid his tactical intentions from Otani, but it also demanded perfect timing and trust between trainer and Pokémon. "Kentaro, keep using rock blockade," Otani said, sticking to his plan. He didn't waver. The change in terrain looked like it hadn't affected the Sandshrew at all, but in fact, it doubled the amount of stamina the creature had to expend. Xiaoming noticed in time and flicked his whip to command the mole rat to stop rolling. That was the trick he could use. "Mosquito, make the ground crack," Xiaoming shouted. Mosquito, the mole rat, obeyed, launching into the air and jabbing the earth with a single claw. The ground split open instantly, and the Sandshrew sprang from the fissure and lunged at Kentaro. "Kentaro, hang on! Get back up!" someone yelled. The Earth-Shatter move was brutal in the game, a one-hit killer if conditions were right. In reality, the rules weren't binding, so it might not be an automatic KO, but Otani didn't want to risk it. Kentaro managed to steady himself, then surged back into the fight. He used Stop to halt the Sandshrew and followed immediately with a resurrection-style charge, slamming into it hard enough to render the Sandshrew unable to continue. "So strong," Xiaozhong breathed, stunned and momentarily speechless. "Mosquito." Xiaoming rushed to the mole rat and began emergency treatment. "Here, give him this to drink." Otani stepped forward and handed Xiaoming a bottle of Moo Moo milk. Moo Moo milk also has restorative properties, so Xiaoming didn't hesitate and fed it to the Sandshrew. The Sandshrew immediately revived and was back to full health. Xiaoming stood there, stunned, staring at the empty bottle in his hand in disbelief, then shifting his gaze to Daguyu. Daguyu only smiled and said nothing. Kentaro came up and nudged Daguyu impatiently. Hey, what about me?" he demanded. Daguyu reacted and fed Kentaro a few cube-shaped treats. The earth-splitting attack from a moment ago had wounded Kentaro, but because the level difference was so large, his injuries weren't serious. "Who are you?" Xiaoming asked, still unsure. Daguyu smiled and replied, "Let me properly introduce myself. My name is Daguyu." Chapter 179, Teaching and Support. "Oh, you're Mr. Otani," Xiaozhong exclaimed, clearly surprised. He couldn't help blurting out, "I always pictured Mr. Otani as a kind, warm-hearted old man." Mr. Otani blinked, a little embarrassed. A bead of sweat appeared at his temple. Why would you think that?" he asked, puzzled. Xiaozhong scratched his head and gave a sheepish chuckle. There's no real reason. People imagine you in all sorts of ways, since you rarely show up in public. Lots of descriptions are floating around, but I always lean toward the kind old man image." Xiaoming, standing nearby, jumped in. "Partly because Mr. Otani seldom appears in public, people get curious and start guessing. And remember, you and Professor Oak co-authored that paper on the evolution of Farfetch'd, which adds to the mystique. Because you two worked so closely together, most people just assumed you and Professor Oak were the same age, respected veterans," Xiaozhong said. Hearing that, Otani's eyes widened. "So that's why." He shook his head and gave a wry smile. "The truth is, I'm just a plain farmer from the countryside. I stumbled onto the far-fetched evolution by accident and told Professor Oak about what I'd seen. I thought he'd publish it under his name, so I didn't expect him to put me down as first author." Otani told the story to Xiaozhong in a frank, almost embarrassed tone. Then he frowned. "But plenty of trainers have seen me. Didn't any of them set the record straight?" Xiaozhong spread his hands in resignation. "Some people did say you were a young farmer, but most didn't believe them." Otani fell quiet. He felt helpless. The public image people had of him was nothing like who he really was, and the mismatch left him confused and unsettled. Because he had always lived out in the countryside with little contact with the outside world, people knew very little about him. After a moment of small talk, Otani settled himself and grew serious. "All right, that's enough of the preliminaries. Xiaoming, I have a question for you," he said. "Please ask, Mr. Otani," Xiaoming replied respectfully. "Why do you want to challenge me again after winning 999 times in a row?" Otani asked, the question he had been holding back finally coming out. He watched Xiaoming closely. Xiaoming hesitated a moment, then answered, "There's nothing to hide. I've heard a bit about your strength, and I'm not sure I could beat you. I set up this plan to push myself and improve as much as possible." Otani gave a slight nod. "That's pretty much what I expected. If that's all, then you don't need to wait until you've won 199 matches in a row to come to me," he said quietly, a hint of regret in his voice. Xiaoming raised his head, a determined look shone in his eyes. "No, Mr. Otani. It's not just about getting stronger. For me, it's more like practice, testing myself and learning what I'm capable of. Every victory is growth. My goal is 999 wins in a row. Only then can I prove my worth." Otani watched Xiaoming as if seeing him anew. The young man's words, delivered with calm certainty, revealed a persistence and resolve Otani hadn't fully expected. A faint smile touched his lips. "So, Xiaoming," he said, "if you really do reach 999 straight wins, do you think you'll be ready to face me?" Xiaoming inhaled slowly, then answered without hesitation. "Yes, Mr. Otani, I believe I would be. You're very strong, but I won't back down. I'll give it everything I've got." Otani nodded. He recognized something behind Xiaoming's declaration. The 999 win obsession was less a mark of arrogance than a cover for insecurity. People cling to impossible targets to silence their doubts. Of course, he thought, there are exceptions, like Xiao Zhang, who never overcomplicates things. He shifted the subject. "There is one thing that bothers me," Otani said. "You've been intercepting trainers who are on their way to challenge me. That puts you at needless risk and upsets the flow here. How about this? Come live on my farm for a while. You can take on any challengers who arrive. It'll give you steady practice and keep others from getting hurt." "What do you think of this plan?" Otani asked with a smile. "Perfect," Xiao Zhang replied eagerly. "Mr. Otani, we'd love to visit your farm too." He gave Xiaoming a conspiratorial wink. Xiaoming hesitated at first. He didn't like imposing on others, but seeing how enthusiastic Xiao Zhang was, and feeling his own curiosity tugging at him, he couldn't refuse. "All right," he said. "Let's pack up and go with you." Otani beamed. "Great. Get ready, and we'll leave right away." Once their things were gathered, Otani didn't ride Kentaro. The farm wasn't far, so he chose to walk with Xiaoming and the others. They strolled along, chatting and laughing, when Xiao Zhang suddenly piped up. "Mr. Otani, are you really just a farmer?" Otani smiled. "Yes, really. I'm a farmer, and I even took part in the town's agricultural exchange conference." Xiao Zhang's eyes widened with admiration. "Wow, that's impressive. By the way, Ming Shu, last year's courts conference champion, is he your disciple?" Xiao Zhang asked. Otani smiled and shook his head. "Not exactly. Ming Shu isn't my disciple. He's a new trainer I sponsored. I just gave him some help and supported him as he developed." "Oh," Xiao Zhang said, a little embarrassed. "I always thought he was your student." "Why's that?" Otani asked, curious. "Because Ming Shu is so strong," Xiao Zhang replied. "He won the quartz conference in his first year competing. I want to go to that competition someday too." "If you work hard, you can," Otani encouraged. Xiao Zhang laughed awkwardly. "Mr. Otani, I know you're trying to make me feel better. I know my own limits." "Don't sell yourself short," Otani said with a smile. "You'd be surprised what you can do." The rest of the walk passed with Xiao Zhang and Dagu doing most of the talking. Xiaoming rarely joined in. Before we knew it, we were back at the farm. Chapter 180, First Step-by-Step Tutorial. When they arrived at Otani's farm, Xiao Zhang and Xiaoming looked around with wide-eyed curiosity. "Wow, Mr. Otani, your farm is huge!" Xiao Zhang exclaimed. Otani laughed. "It's not that big. My neighbor Miwad's place is the huge one, full of fruit trees and all kinds of tropical dragon Pokémon." After that, he led the two of them into the house. Following lunch, Otani gave them a short tour of the farm. They saw all sorts of Pokémon, Venusaur among them, and discovered that Kentaro, the incredibly powerful Pokémon they'd heard about, wasn't even on Otani's first team. He was a member of the second. Such a strong Pokémon, and not even your strongest? Xiao Ming muttered under his breath. Otani only smiled. He didn't offer any of the customary inspirational speeches. Instead, he quietly continued showing them around. When the walk ended, the three of them returned to the front yard and settled into a comfortable spot to sit. For a moment, the mood grew subdued. Otani casually lifted his teacup, blew a little steam from the surface, and slowly breathed in the tea's aroma before taking a measured sip. Xiao Ming sat quietly to the side, brow furrowed, lost in thought. Xiao Zhang kept glancing between Dagu and Xiao Ming as if he wanted to say something, but an inexplicable, heavy silence seemed to press down on him and made it hard to speak. In the end, he remained silent, only watching what unfolded. After a long inner struggle, Xiao Ming finally pushed the words out. "Mr. Otani, could you teach me some of the secrets to becoming a powerful trainer?" There was a mixture of hope and nervousness in his voice, an eager longing in his eyes. Otani set his teacup down slowly and did not answer right away. He paused, gathered his thoughts, then said, "Xiao Ming, how to become an excellent trainer is not something I can simply teach you." Disappointment flashed across Xiao Ming's face. Inwardly, he wondered if he lacked the qualifications. But Otani's next words rekindled his hope. "Everyone finds their own way as a trainer," Otani continued, "and you've already done a very good job of finding your direction." "My method might not suit everyone," Otani said earnestly, "but I'll still give you real help, supplies, and I'll answer any questions you have." "I understand, Mr. Otani," Xiao Ming replied. He was quick to pick up what Otani meant. That afternoon, Otani began training Xiao Ming, pointing out faults in his technique and correcting his form. Since Xiao Ming was no longer blocking the road, more trainers began returning to the farm and challenge him. The steady stream of challengers was exactly what he needed. Every battle gave Xiao Ming a chance to put Otani's lessons into practice. That evening, Otani took time to examine the sandshrew. The diagnosis wasn't encouraging. Years of high-intensity training had left the little mole Pokémon with a number of deep, hidden injuries. Worse, Sandshrew's growth potential had been nearly exhausted by those relentless regimes. No matter how carefully Xiao Ming trained now, the Pokémon struggled to show real improvement. Otani's assessment was a reminder of a harsher truth. In the wild, Pokémon populations often face brutal realities. When an animal becomes too weak, too sick, or simply unable to adapt, its prospects grow grim. Sometimes the group must move on without it. Xiao Ming's mole rat was one of the unlucky ones. Born with a frail constitution, it ranked at the bottom of its cohort and was among the weakest. What was remarkable, though, was that despite its poor start, it had managed to survive this long through sheer grit and relentless effort. It must have endured countless hardships on the long road to growing up. Of course, Xiao Ming's constant care and support played a big part as well. Fortunately, they had finally arrived at a farm that offered hope. Otani knew the mole rat's situation well and had carefully prepared special rations and energy blocks to provide the nutrients it needed and help it recover slowly. Once the preparations were finished, Otani climbed the stairs, hesitated for a moment, then came back down holding a mysterious book. Dagu took the book from him and handed it to Xiao Ming. "This is for you," he said. Xiao Ming accepted the gift with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Xiao Zhang leaned over curiously and whispered, "The Mystery of the Earth?" "That was written by Sakaki," Otani replied. "It contains his lifetime of study, his observations and techniques for training ground-type Pokémon. If you read it carefully, with your talent, you could become a very capable trainer." "Sakaki? As in Sakaki, the leader of Team Rocket?" Xiao Zhang said, surprised. "Yes," Otani said. "He did terrible things, but he poured all his knowledge into this book and didn't hide it. That's why the Alliance never outlawed its sale. Knowledge itself is innocent." Otani wasn't trying to excuse Sakaki's crimes. The point was practical. One reason Team Rocket grew so large was Sakaki's ruthless meritocracy. He promoted the capable and removed the incompetent. That same logic applied to him as leader. He was simply too strong for anyone in the organization to challenge. Xiao Zhang took the book Sakaki had given him and began to read it carefully. Otani had finished the book long ago and filled its margins with his own notes, his personal understandings and insights on the subject. Xiaozhong glanced through it, found it dull, and went back to his room to do his own thing. Seeing Xiaoming so absorbed, Otani didn't want to interrupt him. He told him to go to bed early, went to wash up, and turned in for the night. Late that night, Xiaoming let out a slow breath and closed the book. It was a thorough manual, outlining the entire process from breeding to training ground-type Pokémon, and Otani's short, straightforward annotations made the material even clearer. Even after only a brief read, Xiaoming felt he'd learned a great deal. Still, he found himself sitting on the sofa in a daze for a long time, a little bewildered. "Hey, are you all right?" Sandshrew asked, concern in his voice. "It's nothing," Xiaoming said, voice thick with emotion. "I just can't believe such a book has been right here beside us this whole time and we never noticed it." Chapter 181. The Crisis Arrives Early. At dawn, Otani came downstairs and found Xiaoming engrossed in sparring with the Onion Warrior. He didn't want to interrupt, so he hung back and watched the spirited duel in silence. When breakfast time came, they all sat down together, enjoyed the meal, and then went about their day. Otani's chore for the morning was the orchard. He had already finished tidying the vegetable beds, so now he inspected each fruit tree carefully, pruning away excess branches so the main trunk could take in as much nourishment as possible. By removing competing shoots, he hoped to prevent stunted fruit development and protect the season's yield. It was a patient, precise job, and Otani applied himself to it with quiet concentration. A parade of Pokémon came to help too, hauling away trimmings, rustling leaves, and propping up young saplings. With their aid, the little orchard was spiffed up in a single morning. When he finally sat down on the grass to rest, the sky, which had been pale and still a moment before, suddenly darkened. Clouds gathered and folded into each other until, in the space of a blink, a vast vortex opened directly above the farm, an enormous, churning hole in the sky that appeared with no warning. The vortex radiated a pulse of raw, terrifying power, as if it could swallow everything in its path. A relentless suction rolled out from its center like an invisible giant hand, trying to drag everything nearby into the maw. Without hesitation, Venusaur lashed out with Vine Whip, its vines coiling around Otani and holding him fast, anchoring him so the pull wouldn't sweep him away. Otani's face tightened. No, it's earlier than expected. He made a snap decision and barked orders. "Everyone, prepare to fight. Guanxi, you and your sister get any non-combat Pokémon off the farm now. And contact Du immediately. Tell him to bring reinforcements." At his command, the stronger Pokémon, Venusaur, Raiden, Snorlax, and the others, moved instantly. They closed in around Otani, forming a tight defensive ring, each ready to meet whatever was coming. Determination burned in every pair of eyes. There wasn't a trace of fear among them. The three enormous swarms, Butterfree, Beedrill, and Honeybee, had converged. Every Pokémon present fixed their gaze on the dark vortex spinning overhead. Wind howled around them, and a high, keening whistle cut through the air. Otani cradled Bulbasaur's limp body in his arms and stared up at the maelstrom with all his concentration. Slowly, two indistinct shapes began to take form in the center of the vortex. As they solidified, Otani wasted no time. "Attack!" he ordered. In an instant, a torrent of attacks rained toward the black spiral like a storm of arrows. But the vortex was merciless. Every strike was swallowed as if by a bottomless pit, leaving no trace. One of the figures inside the swirl regarded Otani and his Pokémon with a chilling, indifferent calm. "Dialga, roar of time!" someone cried. "Vulpes, holy sword of nature," another voice answered. The roar of time and the holy sword of nature met with a thunderous clash, their energies exploding outward. The other Pokémon took advantage of the brief distraction to press their assaults. The leader of the Butterfree released a strange, hypnotic rhythm that spread through the air like a silent summons. At once, the members of its flock felt the pull and drifted back toward their leader. A low hum rose, and every Butterfree answered at once. At first, their voices were uneven and chaotic, but they quickly found a shared rhythm, folding into a single, well-trained choir. As they sang, countless powdery scales fluttered from their wings, drifting down like snow and carpeting the ground. Those scales seemed keyed to the Butterfree's song. They began to vibrate at an almost imperceptible frequency, each one making only the faintest, nearly inaudible sound. But where a single scale whispered, thousands together swelled into something vast. A building, rolling wave of noise, as overwhelming as a orm-tossed sea. Butterfree! Buzz! Otani shouted the command. This was the ace he'd been quietly working on with the leader of the flock. With his order, the Butterfrees accelerated their wing beats, the scales shuddering more violently. In perfect unison, every Butterfree on the farm unleashed the buzz attack. The scale powder's amplification magnified the insect's chirps until the sound waves were almost visible, shimmering ripples that poured together with frightening speed. They coalesced into a single blunt roar. Buzz! The pressure hit the black vortex like a cannonball. The man trapped inside the vortex hadn't expected that. He stared wide-eyed, stunned. Whatever Otani had just unleashed was brutal. Its force was enough that even someone on Dialga's level might be knocked out instantly by a direct hit. The violent fluctuations from the clash sent a ripple through the reverse world and set off alarm bells in Giratina. Sensing the abnormal disturbance coming from the farm, it tore open a passage and plunged toward the source without hesitation. When it stepped onto the farm, it was taken aback by the scene. The place looked as if a catastrophe had just passed through. The huge sound wave slammed into the black vortex again, and the vortex began to deform. Its suction faltered and went wild, throwing off erratic pulses, and streaks of dark lightning began to crackle through the air. The fog that had been swallowing the vortex finally cleared, and three figures stood revealed: Otani, Genshin, and Dialga. The Dialga caught in the swirl looked worn and aged. Its eyes were empty and lifeless. Genshin, it's you! Why are you doing this? Otani cried out. A ringing from the earlier soundwave attack still pounded in his ears. They were badly damaged, and I felt dizzy all over. To kill you, of course, Genshin replied coldly. Dialga, roar of time, Dialga obeyed. A terrible temporal roar built and surged toward us. Giratina lunged forward, slipping into origin form, and unleashed its signature shadow strike to meet the attack head-on. The two powers collided, and the roar of time was blocked. Giratina stared into the black vortex where Dialga stood, sorrow in its gaze. The Dialga at Genshin's side no longer had a soul, only an empty body, a puppet twisted to someone else's will. Then the vortex itself began to change. The dark spiral mutated and convulsed, unable to contain or absorb the full force emanating from the entire Butterfree colony. Cracks spidered through the chaotic maelstrom. It was collapsing. Giratina redirected a concentrated assault straight at the rupturing vortex. Otani's unease spiked. No, Giratina, he shouted, but it was one step too late. Giratina's destructive beam ripped the fracture apart. The crack shattered into fragments and then began to dissolve. From the swirling debris, a larger black vortex opened. Genshin laughed. How stupid. It doesn't matter. You'll die once you fall into the time-space vortex. It's a pity I can't kill you myself. Using Dialga as a shield, Genshin vanished into the darkness. Giratina fought desperately against the vortex's terrible suction. Otani only had time to shove the Pokémon closest to him into a Pokéball before the force grabbed him. In an instant, he was dragged into the black hole. The vortex seemed to single him out. After Otani was swallowed, it slowly dissipated. The roar of the collapse sent an alarm through the Alliance. By the time Dew arrived, the entire farm lay in ruins. Standing at the edge of the wreckage, the housekeeper's sister began to sob. Love, she cried, her voice breaking.